Welcome, all you various forms of individuals who individually might identify as human beings or people. This is episode 93 of the Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000 podcast. My name is Dan, and it's that bit at the beginning of the show where I introduce my good buddy Phil. How's it going, Philip? You identify as a human being, right?
I do. Today I identify as Philbo Baggins, as you can see by my little name on the screen.
That is true.
I'm Philbo Baggins.
Philbo Baggins is a pretty spectacular name for you, mate. How we didn't just adopt that as your identity from the outset and refer to you as Philbo Baggins in all, instances is utterly absurd.
Give me 5 minutes. I'll change my Facebook name and my Instagram handle. And if you really want, I can go back through every single episode and just update all the details. So it looks like, chronologically, someone coming to this fresh, that I have always been and will be Philbo Baggins.
Philbo Baggins. It's a good name, man. I mean, to be fair, though, you can pretty much take any name, I would imagine, add the Bo Baggins to it, and it works beautifully. I could be Dan Bo Baggins.
Exactly. Joe Bo Baggins.
Joe Bo Baggins.
Richie
Steve Bo Baggins.
Steve Bo Baggins.
Rich Bo Baggins. Yeah, it's
Tim Bo Baggins.
Tim Bo Baggins. Absolutely. Keith Bo Baggins. It just works beautifully. Not that we know a Keith, but
Well, my dad's a Keith. I'll tell you that.
Is your dad a Keith?
He's a Keith.
It's weird, isn't it? Keith sort of feels like it's becoming, one of the names of yesteryear, like Frida or Fanny, all going away now, aren't they? No one calls their kid Fanny no more.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, maybe. I don't know. There. You're always on the lookout.
The lookout, sir.
The lookout, sir. Warhammer 40,000 podcast. Episode 93. Way!
Yay.
Yay, it's a great episode, I assume. What are we going to be talking about in episode 93, Phil?
Oh, well, today, of all days, we are looking back on a retrospective of one whole year of 9th edition. At the time of recording, we don't actually know if it's been a year. We assume it's around about this time of year. It's probably been over a year, maybe by a few days, maybe by a few weeks. Who knows for sure, because we can't remember, because we don't research these things at all. We don't fact check. That's not what we're about. We're here for undiluted, hard opinions.
Exactly.
No facts allowed.
That's it. Unless, of course, they come in the form of a 5-star review.
Peter!
Oh, hello, Dad.
What are you doing in here, son?
Oh,
What have I told you about wasting your time with these little plastic figurines?
It's not a waste of time, I like it.
How dare you talk back to me, Peter? It's about time you grew up.
I don't want to grow up. Oh, man, maybe there's something on the radio. Yeah, this is nicer.
Peter! Peter!
What's that?
That's right, it's me, the ghost of a award-winning TV and radio presenter, Jeremy Beadle.
Jeremy Beadle?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Now let me tell you here, Sonny, my dad was always telling me to grow up, and I never did. And look how successful I was. So ignore him, Peter, and keep playing with that little plastic crack. And while you're at it, listen to the Lookout Sir podcast, which right now, it's time for the 5-star review.
Wow, thanks, Jeremy.
Who are you talking to with there, son?
Jeremy Beadle.
What? No!
This week's 5-star review comes from where, Phil?
Apple Podcast of Australasia.
Australasia? Australasia? I don't think Australasia is a continent anymore, mate. I think they got rid of that years ago.
Oh, is it not a thing anymore?
I don't think Australasia is a thing anymore. I think it's literally just Asia now.
Well, what about Australia? What's that part of?
I can't remember what continent they're in now, but I'm pretty sure I think Australasia is like one of the old empire terminologies for continents.
Well, sorry if I've offended anyone.
No, I'm sure it's absolutely
But as I
fine.
said earlier, we don't do facts.
We don't do facts. And by extension, I could be entirely wrong. I think there are multiple schools of thoughts on how many continents there are, depending on where you are in the world. I think the Russians or, more the kind of Eastern European area consider there to be 5 and then others 6. And the whole thing is very confusing. It's a whole mishmash of, global fun. But you're wrong, Phil, is the point. Not least because potentially it's not a place anymore, or at least not a term used to describe a place at this time. But it's not even an iTunes review this week, Phil. It comes from the hallowed pages of the Facebooks, which is quite exciting.
The books of
I figured
face.
exactly. I thought I'd dip into Facebook again, call out a review. The issue I have with Facebook, though, I will say this, is it's much more difficult for me to remember which one of these reviews I've used before and which ones I haven't. I feel like I haven't called out this review before, and I didn't really have enough time to fact check it, although I really did. I've done basically nothing today. But essentially,
we don't do facts.
No, we don't do facts. We don't do facts, nor the checking of facts. But buckle in, Phil, because this is a heck of a long review. So yeah, I'm gonna have to, not necessarily do my usual kind of, comedy bants throughout the whole of it, although there will be a bit of it in there because I can't help myself. So here we go. Time to put my reading glasses on as I confront a review from an individual who goes by the name of Luke. We're not going to use the full name of Luke, even though he would appear in his full name on our Facebook page, but we figured for the sake of the podcast, we'll just keep it Luke. Because, we're on first name basis with Luke, aren't we? Best buds, right, Phil?
Exactly. He could be a Skywalker. He could be, I don't know many other famous Lukes, really. So let's just keep it at that.
Yeah, that's it, really. I feel like it's just the one, Luke Skywalker. And...
Luco Baggins, of course.
Oh, yes, of course. And old Luco Baggins. Don't forget old Luco Baggins. Anyway, here it comes. 5-star review on our Facebook page from Luke O'Baggins. One of the best podcasts, no, the only podcast you ever need for Warhammer 40k. This podcast both saved me from pulling out my hair at work from sheer boredom, and are also to blame for my wallet being so thin. Well, there we go. An exciting combination of things that we have contributed. Both the preservation of your head of hair, but ultimately the depletion of your wallet. I assume when you say a thin wallet, you refer to the amount of money that's within it, not that you are, streamlining your wallet to a smaller size to accommodate the relative lack of necessity of cash in this modern world. What do you imagine, Phil?
Well, I imagine, he needs to spend some money on some hair growth cream, but he's broke from having to buy Games Workshop models. So
he said that we've saved him from pulling out his hair, which would imply there is hair there for the pulling.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, he spent that hair cream that he would have needed on models instead.
Are you suggesting, Phil, that somehow our podcast, or potentially Luke is suggesting that our podcast has hair preservation powers?
Well, he said it himself. It does.
Well, exactly. There we go. So there you are. We should, look into that and see whether, see if it's legally, see if it's responsible for us to suggest that our podcast can be part of a successful hair growth treatment.
It's just come in now. The fact checks from the lawyers have said it's okay.
There we go. Noting from the theme of this segment, we don't deal in facts
Exactly.
in this realm. Apparently, Luke messaged Phil on Instagram beyond the tabletop. It's nice that he plugs your Instagram on this 5-star review as well.
He's really much. Thank you.
He's taken all the boxes to personally thank him for the endless hours of entertainment, and was over the moon when I received a reply. Wasn't expecting it, considering hobby life and work life is extremely time consuming. So thanks. As promised, here's what I had to say. 5 stars. I do like that he, solely thanks your good self for the production of many hours of.
How do you feel about that, Dan?
Obviously in my mind, you're, when I think.
Am I just your secretary that he thanks,
that's it.
And I have to pass the message on to you, which I invariably do most of the time, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I sort of, I don't know. I like to sort of think it. It's basically, I'm the star of the show, and you're here too.
I'm the PA. Yeah.
Yes. Obviously, that couldn't be further from the truth. But anyway, we'll continue on because this is lengthy. Love the podcast. Gets me through the daily grind at Jaguar Land Rover Solihull. There we go. Using small headphone, I can secretly listen. Shh. I've listened to every episode so far. the information, the chemistry between you guys and the general squabble is top marks. I will post a 5-star review soon. It's well deserved. Just Player FM doesn't allow reviews. Boo. Well, obviously, he has literally just copy pasted what he sent to you on Instagram by the seat of the sounds.
But maybe that's authentic.
Well, exactly. He's staying true to it. I mean, at the end of the day, they're a good series of words. Why, compromise and come up with new ones, even if contextually speaking, it's a bit jarring. I also want to thank you and Dan. Oh, look, there you go. Got in there somewhere. For getting me into 40k. I've only had it for a year. I've got 2,500-ish points of Necrons painted, and I've been able to bond with my dad as we built a 6x4 table over the bank holiday. Wow, that's pretty incredible. My now 2-year-old son loves to see my models, and I allow him to have a brush and water to practice on a dreadnought whilst I hobby. Interesting choice of models to allow the 2-year-old son to, muck around with. I guess it's probably the least choke hazardy of models for a 2-year-old because it's quite substantial.
True.
Takes some going to eat one of those. Keep up the great work. Look forward to the future episodes. Forever a listener. Blimey, there we go. That implies that we've got to continue producing these forever, which is a daunting prospect, to say the very least. But I guess if we are sustained forever by listeners such as Luke, maybe worth trying to do it. Maybe this is the key not only to a full head of hair, but eternal life through producing non-stop content about Warhammer 40,000.
I know the way you said that, the way we're almost like nourished by them, makes me feel like we're vampires and we're literally feeding off of them to, gain eternal youth.
That's it. If only we had eternal youth, right, Phil? I mean, that'd be nice. I imagine more eternal life. The youth part is definitely fading away with every moment of every day. The existential dread of being in your late 30s. What a time to be alive. The thing I like about it, though, it's always really amazing to hear about, the shared experiences. I think that's always something I really like when we get these reviews in, because it's actually quite awesome to hear about how people kind of share their hobby and their experiences with their loved ones, their friends, their family. So it sounds awesome that, obviously him and his dad have come together and built this rather awesome 6x4 gaming table that he actually photographed and shared a photo of in the review as well. Looks absolutely awesome. 6x4 is the way forward, in my opinion. I think if you've got the space for it, you shouldn't restrict yourself to the 44x60. Though I acknowledge and accept that that's how it is now, I am still not a member of the hashtag small board club, as it is lovingly called. But there we go, Phil.
Gang.
Small board gang. See, I don't even so non a member am I. I don't even know what it's officially called. Anyway, come on, Phil. Thank old Luke, and we'll move on to the rest of the show.
Luco Baggins, thank you very much. Hopefully your manager doesn't also listen to this podcast and maybe fires you for your naughty listening during worky times. But I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure at the end of the day, it's all good in the hood, as they say. Well done. Congratulations on building a lovely table. Congratulations on bonding with your dad and your son, I think you said. Well done on forming all of those things together. That's what the hobby is best for, and what it's all about. It's for heart, and as someone from a popular movie would say, it's all about family. So, yeah.
Well, there we are. That being said, though, Luke, I do genuinely feel like you should have done a little bit more to acknowledge my contribution. That's all I'm going to say. Like a little bit disappointed, if I'm honest with you, Luke. I mean, I'm saying thank you, but really, deep down, I'm not impressed.
Disappointed.
Anyway, thank you very much for being a listener for forever.
I mean, that is commitment. That's a binding pact with us now that you can't escape from.
I mean, let's move on. Transitional noise. Woo! Oh God, that didn't even work. That was a transitional noise. Hang on. The nerves, the anxiety. Woo! All right there, Philip. In this part of the podcast, mate, we're going to be talking about a year of Warhammer 40,000, the 9th edition specifically, Phil. How exciting, eh? To be unpacking a year of Warhammer 40,000 related fun. Do you remember when Warhammer 40,000, when Warhammer 40,000's 9th edition became a thing? It was July something or other. I just can't remember exactly when.
Yeah, June, July sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it was more July than June, but whatever the case, it happened not too long ago. In fact, a year ago, and many things have occurred during the span of 9th edition. Not least, obviously, the overarching, global scenario, which has had a huge impact on everything that has essentially been going on with the game of Warhammer 40,000. But yeah, me and Phil are just going to go through the process of reminiscing, reliving the fun and the not so fun parts of 9th edition, where we feel like it's at, and essentially where we feel like it might go in the future. Who can say for sure? We will at least try to speculate. So, I mean, going into 9th edition, Phil, what was your general vibe towards it? I mean, again, were you excited? Were you apprehensive? What were your feelings going into 9th?
Ooh, now you're asking a question that involves me remembering stuff, which I think is my strong suit.
Brilliant.
So I'm gonna say or pretend that I was probably quite excited about it. I think everyone was excited about the Indomitus box. I think that was the main wow factor. And the models, obviously, all very cool. I finally got around to building some of them, not all of them. I think the rule book, I remember eventually finally getting around to reading all the lore aspects of it, all the fluffy first half of the book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That was all exciting. And they made a point about saying it was all brand new, all written from scratch, no copy pasting from previous codex, which was, very cool. Artwork, phenomenal. Layout, pretty good. Like overall for that bit of the book, amazing. Yeah. The rules, I remember being a bit confusing in places. Like the masses of text plus the bullet points is sometimes a bit overwhelming. And to this day, I still get annoyed that if you want to work out how to do a deny psychic power, it's not in the right place because it's not under the bit next to casting a psychic power. It's like somewhere else within those rules. So that bit still bugs me to this day because it's one of those least used rules. So it's one I always need to look up and I can never find for like 5 minutes. Going, where is it? It's here somewhere. Yeah. But overall, I think I was pretty positive and excited about it. Bit intrepid maybe about some of the things like the secondaries and the terrain and the more kind of ITC style mission format that came, because obviously the GT mission pack came at the same time as 9th edition. What about you?
Well, I think, going into it, I was relatively optimistic about what 9th was going to represent. I felt like they had hit a good groove with 8th edition. And there were some clear problems with 8th edition in so much as towards the end of 8th edition's life, I would broadly have categorized it as a bit of a Frankenstein's monster in so much as there's the kind of core rulebook that was released at the start. And then over time, it just been patched and patched and patched to the point that the 8th edition rulebook that you purchased to play Warhammer 40,000 as part of your Dark Imperium. Not Dark Imperium. What was it? Dark Imperium was the old box? Yeah, Dark Imperium.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If you bought that box set in a store, what you got in that rule book was broadly worthless in so much as almost every aspect of 8th edition had been FAQ'd with only a few elements, really remaining the same. The movement phase was heavily FAQ'd around the interactions around the fly keyword and how that worked. I really only feel like it was like what you needed to roll to hit stuff and what you needed to roll to wound stuff that remained broadly the same. Although I think even then they probably FAQ'd a number of variables with regards to what you need to do to hit stuff. So yeah, it was one of those things where 8th had reached a point where it was just a horrible mess in terms of the amount of literature and the amount of, supplementary elements that you needed to kind of bolt in order to play it the way that it was intended to be played when doing it properly. I mean, obviously, if you just picked up an 8th edition rulebook and you were playing games with a mate, you could probably navigate your way around that rulebook without having to accommodate all the FAQs and erratas. But for those of us who were trying to keep up to speed with a living rule set, I'd say we'd gotten to the end of what 8th could meaningfully accommodate. So yeah,
but the game itself was good though at the time.
Oh mate, yeah. Like I liked 8th edition by the end. Look, I still had problems with 8th edition in so much as I felt like 8th edition's melee system, much like in 9th editions, is pretty awful. There were some other things that I had sort of issues with, but yeah, I think one of the things that was nice about 8th edition was it was like that living rulebook thing. We've said this many times before, but it was nice. It sort of you went on a journey with them, and it felt like they were exploring ideas but not overloading anything, and but they definitely had created problems with the Marine codexes of 2019, and it was just time. It was time to redo it. And my hope is that 9th edition was going to be a sort of streamline and incorporating all of those FAQs and erratas and adding in some other, fun balancing things to kind of fix it. And in a lot of respects, 9th edition is a better version of 8th edition. But I think, and we'll get to this, I guess, but I think where it is drastically different is where they've added, as you've already indicated, to the secondaries and the missions and all those kind of elements. And but yeah, going into it, I was excited. I think I'd lived with 8th edition for its lifespan. I've been playing it since the day it came out. I definitely struggled adjusting my thinking from 7th to 8th, but I finally arrived at a point where I was comfortable with 8th edition. So I was broadly excited for 9th because it seemed like it was just gonna change things. Because the things you need to remember about 8th that were problematic were the way that you accrued CP really led you down very weird routes when it came to army list construction. It was all about building in this kind of weird redundancy in order to achieve command points. And that was very strange because you ended up in situations like the Rusty 17 or the Loyal 32 or whatever it was for your respective armies. And yeah, there were just a number of weird little things that needed to be refined.
Yeah, there were lots of little kind of gamey mechanics that the tournament scene had kind of created as sort of like, oh, this is the way to play it because this is how you can abuse the rules. Like, wrapping units so they can't escape. Or slingshotting your unit across, wrapping them so you can't be shot at, and then you'll kill them in your turn, or you'll kill them in their turn because you deliberately don't kill them in your turn, kill them in their turn, and then you're free to go on to a more juicy target. And again, same with wrapping vehicles, destroying them to like auto kill the units inside. Things like stringing out your coherency into a big long line, so you've got 20 squad of orc boys doing a conga line from one side of the map to the other, potentially on several objectives as well. So all of those things they did a really good job of just tidying up, and mostly via the use of some stratagems or with coherency. It was fixed in the actual rules, but like sort of fixing all of that and going, well, actually that's not what we intended, this is done. And then they did some other stuff, give some bonuses to vehicles. They changed how some of the weapons worked and stuff like that. So all of that stuff was really cool and positive, I thought.
Yeah, and they publicized it really well. They put together really great video content and illustrations that kind of went through like the 20 or whatever it was, kind of like key differences. And there was a lot of really good stuff there, and it seemed like it seemed very clear to me that the rules writers understood what the issues were with the system and how to go about best adapting it. And they did a great job of communicating it. And I think that was the thing, right? It's like from the outset, as a statement of intent from the initial announce when they went, here's our big swanky CG trailer. It had a certain excitement around it as well, because I think, the thing you need to remember when recapping the announce of 9th edition is that 9th edition came after a period of, drought when it came to Warhammer content in the general sense. Obviously, COVID and the impact of COVID had come into full effect in the UK around March, and Games Workshop were as impacted as everyone else, and they ultimately adopted to essentially cease, trading effectively for about a month and a half while they figured out what they were actually going to do. So from like March to May, you couldn't buy anything, and I feel like there were all these like movements online to buy like retro 40k, or just there was like a period of time where people were just buying up anything related to Warhammer because they just wanted to get their hobby fixed somewhere, or their retail therapy, as it might have been, because again, when you're dealing with the stress and anxiety of the outward situation, you do fall back onto the things that bring you comfort. And I think a lot of people find comfort in buying Warhammer miniatures, even if they don't go on to then paint them. I know in myself, I enjoy the buying of it probably more than anything else, because if that wasn't the case, I don't understand why I'd have as much of it as I do.
Exactly. Yeah.
But so it was crazy. So we'd come off this relative like drought. Games Workshop were coming back and going, look, we're going to be opening up again, and we're going to be starting to sell stuff again, and oh, by the way, here's a brand new edition. So they really came back in a big way. And I think, at the time, as a community, we were just so hungry for this, because all of us had been, locked up in our homes, keeping away from each other, and just having a new rule set. I felt like there was more, emphasis, gravitas around this than any edition of 40k I can remember before. Even 8th edition, the launch of 8th edition didn't feel as substantial as the launch of 9th edition. But that is very much, I believe, well, in my opinion, for me.
Okay, yeah. I think go on.
Yeah, sorry, please. No, please.
Well, I was going to say, in a way, I think you're right. I think partly because from 8th edition, that was a huge deal. I remember when we got to go to Warhammer Fest and we got to like play our first, game of it. I think with this
Which
one,
was
though,
terrible, by the way.
Yeah, because you just get a streamlined experience of it, and weirdly, we knew almost more of the rules than because of the previews than the person trying to explain it to us. So we were like, "Oh, can you actually do this thing?" And anyway,
and it was quite funny as well, right? Because he wasn't really interested, because he kind of got the vibe that we sort of knew what we were doing, and
left us to it.
Well, they had one guy looking after like 4 or 5 or 6 tables, so he sort of like would dot around, and you're like. And literally me, Phil, Joe, and was it Richie at the time? Or
Yeah,
Tim?
I think so.
I felt like it was Tim, because I think Richie was still in the US at this time.
Oh, yeah, actually, I think.
So I think like it was like Tim or Sean or someone. Anyway, we're playing it, and we're literally like, it was literally like us just running our own little intro game. But it was crazy, because it was literally a unit of 10 Poxwalkers, 1 unit of Death Guard, and a Blight drone up against some Primaris Marines. So it was so ridiculous trying to even to begin to understand how this game played based on just what was a very tiny interaction. But I would have been very happy if I was able to have gotten hold of one of their little sample kiosk POS plinths that they created. Those were quite cool.
Oh yeah, they were very useful. Anyway, my point was like, we got to do that, and that was like a very sort of interactive experience in person at a Warhammer Fest. So there's a bit of buzz there. Whereas now, actually, I think, because of the way it was launched, everyone's at home, they're doing the live streams, everything's sort of focused around Warhammer community. It felt a lot more like you're a part of something, because it's not being a launch down at your local store, although I think to an extent, actually, by the time stores were open by the time it did get launched, but it was very much like an online experience that everyone got to do at the same time, as opposed to, for those lucky people at Warhammer Fest, they got something, and then, other people got things at different periods of time. But also, I think they just sort of nailed it so much more, like clearly learned from their experience of 8th edition, and back in 8th edition, I think, Warhammer community was still relatively newish thing, I want to say, because it was probably came out a year or two before. I honestly can't remember. It feels like even then, Warhammer community hasn't been around for that long. It definitely wasn't around when I first started.
Yeah, Warhammer community really kicked into gear sort of halfway through the original Age of Sigmar. And then definitely, about 2015, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And obviously, that is a marketing machine, and it's now a much more of a well-oiled engine than it would have been around the time that 8th came out. So I think, I can see a lot more hype around it for 9th.
Well, I just think because it unified everyone in speculation and conversation, and essentially it became this thing that, I think it kind of bridged some gaps in terms of, it again brought the hobby community back together, because prior to this we were all kind of, I think what was really interesting about the COVID period was that everyone started diving into their own little projects, and they started becoming much more kind of, again, quite insular, quite hobby focused for their own little things. Like, you were working on your Minotaur stuff, I had bought into like a retro Elder collection, I was working on tables, Joe was probably building something with banners. There were lots and lots of different things. Yeah, exactly. As night follows day, Joe will stick a banner on it. But anyway, so that was the thing. I felt like it was really exciting. And what I will say, I thought the trailer was a really bold move on their part. I was intrigued by the fact that they did a trailer, because it didn't necessarily feel like it was. Again, there was a part of me that felt it was weird that you'd use a form of digital kind of, CG animation to promote a board game, but then it's quite commonplace.
Do you want it to be like a Hero Quest style TV ad where it's people rolling dice and then the orcs come to life?
Yes,
maybe they should have done that. A sort of retro
broadsword.
Exactly, broadsword. Get your broadsword.
Yeah, I don't know. It was very striking. I just didn't expect it at the time, because it was so against like the norm. They were definitely doing new stuff with it, which was cool. And it was exciting. And I think, the thing you got to remember as well with that, and again, I talk about it like it's a lifetime ago, but the thing is that you got to remember as well is like so much was changing with this edition, and so much, even down to the artwork presentation. Like when they started showing the new artwork that was going to be in this book, you could tell that there had been this tonal shift where the 8th edition books were essentially following in the footsteps of like 7th edition, where it was single characters, large, bold, kind of very cartoony kind of graphics, where it was just big, bold characters. And again, saying cartoony kind of does it a disservice, because it was gorgeous art, but very kind of dialed in on that one character. Whereas now all the artwork is so much grander. There's so much more scale. And I'll tell you, one of the things that was really striking to me with the 9th edition artwork is the fact that they'd obviously gone back to a time where they allow their artists to paint or illustrate imagery that isn't directly referencing a range that they sell. Because it used to be that all the terrain features in the artwork would have to be based on legitimate like Games Workshop kits. And that was crazy, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, because I do even remember in 8th edition, what's it called? The Chaos Spider type vehicle.
Yes.
That was spotted I think in retrospect, in one of the artworks, like tiny, minuscule, like in the background of one of these big, larger set pieces. And people were like, it was there all along, but you never really sort of spotted it. And quite often people would speculate and look at these gorgeous illustrations to try and go, what's that new thing? What's that silhouette? That's definitely different, because we all knew that they only really ever illustrated stuff that had a model. So you quite often you look at stuff and speculate about whether that's a new model or not. Sometimes it would actually just turn out to be a bit of artistic license. I think one of the head scratchers at the time was, I think it was an Iron Hands warrior with a sword and like a proper like Crusader style shield. And to this day, that wasn't ever a range or a model. It was clearly just artistic license. You could say it was a precursor to the Blade Guard, but it clearly wasn't Blade Guard at the time, and doesn't look anything like what Blade Guard looks like. So who knows what that was.
It was interesting because that was a period of time from like the 8th edition time where literally, everything was very literal, and that's fine. Like, that was a reasonable thing to do. But I like the fact that they now are working with illustrators or artists, or giving their existing illustrator artists the opportunity to be more expressive. And I think that's the thing. You look at the Mechanicus cover, which is one of the greatest Codex covers ever. It's so expressive. Yes, it's got Skitarii in it. Yes, it's got the new, Lord of the Skitarii man in it.
The Marshal.
The Marshal, yeah. But again, he's not in the exact pose with his pistol up in the air. But the main figure in the foreground, the kind of central figure. I mean, unless that's Belisarius Call, I don't think it is. I think it's just a generic
fabricated general type person.
Yeah.
And he's huge.
Yeah. And it's incredible because there's no miniature of that. That doesn't exist. It's just artistic license. And I love that. That's because that's so much more evocative of the setting and the world.
I do want it to be a miniature though.
Oh, of course. I mean, if that ever became a thing, that'd be amazing. I have to admit, for every Mechanicus cover, though, there is stuff like the Drakari cover or the Sisters cover, which leaves me a little bit cold. I don't know who that illustrator is specifically, but it's the ones where it's like, here's a running person, and it's like,
yeah. I mean, they're good. They're solid
still great,
covers, but they're not on the same level of weirdness as the Adeptus Mechanicus one. But then I think it's hard to, the Mechanicus range and kind of concept and their theme and background allows them to go off in that direction, whereas you can't really necessarily maybe do that with the others. Maybe Sisters they could have. I mean, they could have had a crazy Penitent engine or something on there.
Yeah. I feel like the Blood Angel cover, they got the right balance of dude in the foreground kind of, getting stuck in, but they had enough kind of action going on around it where it sort of became interesting. I think of all the Space Marine Codex covers, I like the Dark Angels the most because it's much more kind of stoked in ceremony, I suppose, and there's a lot more creative license again being kind of illustrated there with the way that they've put all the iconography and other things on the Marines in the foreground. But but for the most part, the art direction of 9th edition immediately jumps out at you as just, again, it's when it comes to these sort of things, it's difficult to assert whether it's better, but I certainly like a lot more of the artwork more than some of the previous works.
Definitely better.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And they're also, from a Codex perspective as well, they're so much more willing to put in really awesome pieces. Like, again, not to wax lyrical about the Mechanicum Codex again, but that John Blanche piece at the end of the Codex, it's just so nice to see that in a book again, where you're like, oh, yes.
Yeah, that is a nice bit for sure.
Oh, it's very nice. It's very nice. But yeah, so artistically, big change. And then obviously when we get the rule book and when they start previewing the rules, the big thing we see straight away is the new format of the rules. Because again, 8th edition, huge emphasis on broader simplification of the rules, but also huge emphasis on the streamlining of the rules, which created rather large FAQs. But I definitely remember some initial wow, hang on a second here, what's going on? I mean, how did you feel about that, Phil, in terms of the way that rules are being structured now? You kind of spoke about it before, but
Yeah, I think they've gone down a almost very kind of legal tournament style way of presenting the rules. The bullet points is a cool concept, and clearly they've embraced that with AOS 3. With you've got your chunk of text explaining the rule, you got your bullet points like with 40k, but then they've got like a little side panel, like an aside, where it's like the designer's commentary, as far as I'm aware, where they're sort of giving you a bit more background and reasoning behind it. I think that for me the problem with it is it's very like technical and wordy and sometimes a bit over explained because they're trying to cater for every single like nuance of misinterpretation, that sometimes it just becomes really like it's kind of just gives you a headache reading it, and it's not a pleasant or fun experience trying to read those rules. Even just going through the bullet points, sometimes you're like, oh, this is confusing. Even to this day, I still constantly look back at the Lookout server rule, trying to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, and it's like, have I got this right? I just need to double check sometimes.
That is one of the problems with it, though, as a rule set, is that they have over-explained in some instances. And I think, again, you know, without wanting to kind of pat myself on the back here, I think I encapsulated the problem with 9th edition's rule set almost perfectly when we did our initial review of 9th edition, which was the statement of the inmates have taken over the asylum. And I do think that when it comes to 9th edition, I think they have overly catered to the competitive community to the detriment of the game overall. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that I had expected them to essentially tier their rule system. So I had assumed going into this that I would get something akin to 8th edition but a bit more refined, and then I would get an advanced rule section that would go into that level of extraordinary detail, because that was kind of how they promoted it at the start. It was like the idea of like, we're doing, you know, it's still this, but we're going to give you more in the advanced rule stuff. And I almost would have preferred that if they just literally gone, here you go, guys, here is the rules in essence. Here is it in detail if it matters to you. And here are some really, really odd edge case scenarios if these pop up. So kind of like tiering it from, you know, normal, advanced, extraordinary, and then just kind of let it be in that regard.
I mean, that is a great idea, because having a 4-page like introduction to 40k, like how to play, which is effectively what the original 8th edition was, would be really easy to get people into play 40k. Just your basics, you know, this is how you move, this is how you shoot, brilliant. But then, you know, the advanced section is, this is your tournament play, this is where we go into much more detail about it all. I imagine the reason why I don't want to do that is because if they do have to update rules, they've effectively got to update it in 2 places, because one has a knock-on effect with the other. And I could just see an unwillingness to want to do that.
Only if you assert that the kind of the normal vertical needs to be amended, because I think most people will be happy in there. You know, most people who play in a casual, friendly setting can accommodate each other to the point that this is fine. The advanced side of it is probably the area you tweak. Now, okay, fair enough. If you start to massively reinterpret aspects of the rules, then fine. And this is one of the things that's really intriguing to me, and something that we'll talk about more and more in the future, is the kind of systems that power this game. Because as far as I'm concerned, like the kind of core rules within 9th edition shouldn't really be drastically changing over time. I kind of feel like the core systems of the game should be that well refined that and that well defined that we can pretty much have a rule set that doesn't drastically change year on year. I think that's essential. But the thing is that, you know, that's not been the case for a little while. What that will be in the future, we will wait and see. But, you know, I don't know. That was what I was hoping for.
Well,
Whatever the situation, that was what I was hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, it was like we last episode we talked about. We'd watched some videos and interviews with some of the original authors of 40k. One of them I think was interesting was Andy Chambers. I think it was a guy with like really long hair, bit of a punky type guy. I think that was Andy Chambers. I think so. Anyway, he was talking about going from this was probably like 2nd to 3rd edition.
Yeah.
He was sort of asked about codexes and why will the old codexes be made redundant, and it was like, well, no, they should still be compatible with the new system. And the idea behind a new edition of the game was almost like the aim isn't to drastically redo codexes or army lists, or if you look at a particular a demon prince, the concept there is a demon prince will be a demon prince throughout every single codex. A codex is just to refine the rules and fix mistakes. If there's a typo, we're going to fix it in the new edition. But ultimately, it's just almost like a reprint of the previous edition. And all we're going to do is, maybe we're adding some new units and stuff. And that was, I think, the logic back in the very early days. Is this is an unchanging system. We make small tweaks to it where needed to fix problems. Whereas now I think they look at it less like that, and they go, how can we evolve it? How can we repackage the rule set every 4 years to make you want to buy the new version? And to do that, to an extent, you can just go, we're going to tweak 8th edition. But I think ultimately they go, we need to overhaul it in a bit more of a drastic way to make it feel like you're getting value for money out of it. It's a justification for us to sell you a new edition. And, hopefully those evolutionary steps will make the game more interesting. Like, they completely overhauled sort of how morale works, how adding in the combat attrition. And that's because obviously they felt like that wasn't really working. They wanted to completely redefine it.
Yeah. So, yes, no, I take on your point there. So from the outset, we get the rule book, we see what that's all about, and then obviously we hear about Indomitus, and Indomitus is a really exciting release because ultimately it's a whole slew of fantastic new Marines, which is always very popular, but also a really exciting range refresh for the Necrons, a much needed range refresh for the Necrons. Those guys have been lingering in purgatory. They've been in their status fields for too long, buried under the ground
in their slumber.
Yeah. So seeing new Necrons was, I thought, a really great statement of intent for things to come. The way I look at 8th edition now in retrospect is I kind of look at 8th edition as a kind of, stopgap between what was 7th and what will go on now to become the game of 40k, because and where they start to kind of express their new ideas and come up with new armies. And I thought that the Necrons were a really great example of what was to come, which was massive range refreshes. This is what I was eagerly anticipating with the release of the Necrons. I was like, I can't wait to see all the new Craftworld stuff that's going to come along, or I can't wait to see what they do with the Grey Knights or the Tyranids. There was so much optimism at that point that we were going to get into almost an Age of Sigmar style things, where every single release is going to be a fantastic range of new miniatures done in the spirit of of these armies. And to a certain extent, that is kind of what is happening at the moment. I just feel like it hasn't quite dialed up yet. It feels a little bit like it just feels a bit at this moment in time. It's a bit still stunted, I suppose. But
yeah, I mean, it is interesting because we've had so Necrons, they've had a huge range refresh. Orcs are clearly getting one as well,
which is incredible.
If Eldar also get it, that will be pretty phenomenal. Like this edition.
Yeah. Well, it has to happen, right? Like, there's so many ranges within 40k that need refreshing in one way or another, but I would argue none more so than the Craftworld Aeldar. But actually, it's between Craftworld Aeldar and the Guard. Let's be fair. I think those are the two armies that are in most desperate need for it. But Yeah, it's just I thought Necrons were really exciting. I thought that was something that got me excited from the outset. I was like, oh yeah, this is looking cool. Like, don't get me wrong, I've not collected Necrons. I say I've not collected them. I've amassed the miniatures. I haven't done anything with them, but they're there because obviously, like everyone else, I ended up getting a bunch when buying all my fabulous new Assault Intercessors and or Blade Guard that I don't use anymore because rubbish. Although they're not rubbish, it's just that the meta has gone crazy. Not that I care about that anymore. Let's carry on. So I think that's the thing. It's like it was exciting. It was a very exciting start to the whole process, and Indomitus was, it was a pretty good thing from the outset. I mean, I don't think you can say anything aggressively bad about Indomitus other than the supply and demand problem.
Yeah, I think that was the only thing. If you didn't get hold of a copy, you were probably pretty annoyed about it, or it was pretty difficult to track down, for example. And I know a few people that were in that position. I think some of them only got their copy like a month or two ago.
Oh, really? What, for the reprints?
For the reprints, yeah. So they eventually did come around, but took their time about it. But obviously, these things happen. Maybe it was, partly unexpected. And this is the thing I was going to say, going back to the why 9th edition felt like a really big thing. And I think it's just because the player base is now so much bigger. When it was in 8th edition, the start of 8th edition, it was in decline to an extent because so many people hated 7th edition. Lots of people were playing Horus Heresy instead. Eventually, I think they got a lot of those players back, and 8th edition, because of, I don't know if it was because of the ease to play or the ease of rules in terms of learning, getting into it, because it was only 4 pages, for example, or maybe there's a few more. But anyway, I don't know if it was because of that. A lot of old people got back into the hobby, people that hadn't played it since they were a kid, a lot of new people, like, the amount of people that comment on this podcast who are like, oh yeah, I've just, in the last few years gotten back into 40k. Because of us, they've bought a Necron army, for example. I'm so sorry to that person and to your wife. But it's that sort of thing. And I think, coming up to 9th edition, you've just got so much, much more people. That's not a word. Many more people playing the game. And because of that, maybe that also, due to COVID, factor into that supply and demand issue. If they just underestimated how well it would supply. Not a problem with, what was it, the Dominion, because I think its boxes even now, several weeks later, are still available to sell. Yeah. And I don't know if that's just because they're just doing a print on demand thing, and it's just, that isn't obvious how that's being done, or if they just, pre-made way more than they necessarily needed in anticipation for it. But either way, it's a good thing that you can get hold of,
I presume it's because I assume it's just because Age of Sigmar is nowhere near as popular as 40k as well, right? That's obviously going to be a factor.
Always, play into it to an extent. Yeah.
But I genuinely, again, not to massively go off on a tangent, but I genuinely feel like the Cruel Boys were potentially a bit of a misstep in terms of the dance partner for the Stormcast. But I also think the Stormcast sculpts left a lot to be desired. I think as a box set,
I disagree.
I was very underwhelmed by it.
Well, I think it's that classic case of, I assume Stormcast sell really well because they're poster boys. But at the same time, I think a lot of people that play fantasy do hark back to that old style Warhammer fantasy Empire sort of miniature range. Anyway, we're going off on a tangent. But...
Yeah. Gloomspite gets all the way though, mate. What an army. Loads of silly old goblins. Lovely old time. Anyway, so I think, to your point though, Phil, I think, it was an interesting time because, again, the supply and demand thing was quite crazy. And I think, again, I remember frantically trying to buy my, edition of Indomitus, getting up and getting ready to refreshing the page over and over again. I bought it through Games Workshop's web store because I didn't want to go through a third party because I just didn't trust, that I was going to get it if I did that. I then also remember the general sense of like frustration and, to a certain extent, anxiety that I had the day of release when I thought that, Games Workshop had mucked up and my delivery wasn't going to come the day of release, because even though I was locked down with nowhere to go or no one to see, the idea of not having my Indomitors box on the day of release filled me with existential dread beyond any of the other stuff that was plaguing my thoughts at the time. But credit where credit's due to them. Around 10:30, 11ish in the morning of its release, there it was, sat on my front doorstep, ready to be digested.
That's impressive, because I always assume with Games Workshop they post it out on the day of release, and you tend to get it Monday, Tuesday.
No, in my experience, they get it for you on the Saturday, almost always.
I've never had that when I've bought direct through Games Workshop, but
No, I've bought the last few codexes direct through Games Workshop, only because of the fact that I've noticed from like AdMech onwards, there's been complications with distribution. So I've just been like, I'll just buy it direct, so as to make sure that at least one of us has the codex ready to go.
That's true. So speaking of which, in terms of things that weren't ready to go when they were promised, the Warhammer app that was meant to come out at release, and I think it was like 2 months later when it actually came out.
Yeah, so the app is a really interesting part of the 40k saga, right? Because I think one of the things that was craziest about all of this was that, they really wanted to illustrate to us early doors that they were embracing the future and giving us all this fantastic new functionality. And, the app was definitely touted early doors as being integral to the overall kind of ecosystem of 40k. And I think, you and I at the time were quite, excited about the prospect of it, because I think you and I at the time were buying into the idea that it could be something quite incredible. And I don't know whether or not that general enthusiasm or optimism led to us being even more disappointed by it, or whether or not it was just that disappointing that it was difficult not to be. But yeah, I mean, the app is in a way the first of, but certainly one of the most significant missteps in the management of 9th edition. I think I think the app has been a rather poor service overall. Even though I subscribe to it every month and find myself using it from time to time, I don't think it's very good still.
Well,
I don't know.
I do use it on a regular basis. I very rarely use it for army building, though. I do subscribe, and obviously I've purchased some codexes. And I, to this day, still can't tell what I'm actually getting out of that paid subscription other than the app builder. I think certain rules are locked and you unlock them either via a codex purchase or maybe via...
You only unlock... So modern codexes, so if it's had a codex in 9th edition, you only unlock its full rule set if you register that codex to your subscription. So what your subscription gives you right now is every codex in detail other than
the new
every
ones.
Codex, every 9th edition codex, yeah. And then even then, just to say, even the 9th edition codexes are missing content. Like there is stuff that you can't find out in the app.
Some of the layouts or some of the rules always seem to be missing. There's always like weird things, like not necessarily things like warlord traits, but some of those more esoteric army rules aren't where you think they are. Even the division between, so when you do a search in the kind of codex reference section, you can't find any core rules there. And when you're looking for core rules, in that section you can't find anything else. But weirdly, things like I think terrain under the codex section, because they're classed as like advanced rules that are sort of separated out. So sometimes you got to know which half of the app to search in to find something. It's useful, but it's still quite frustrating to use and isn't quite perfect. I did a whole post about my acolytes no longer being able to get access to stormbolters and showing off my Manfred Wilhelm model on Instagram, who is modeled with a stormbolter, and going, well, this is upsetting. He's technically no longer WYSIWYG. And I had a few people, mention that, actually maybe he's not realizing that the rules had changed. And I was like, it's, in the app, when you look up the acolyte rules, they don't have access to them. And I think eventually I went back to the source, which was the prior Nexus book, and actually turn out they do have them, and it's just a mistake in the app. And you do sometimes get these weird kind of, what's the more correct, what's the more canon version of a rule?
Yeah.
Is it the app where they've updated it? So, for example, Sisters of Battle, some of them now say -1 damage to a minimum of 1, whereas in the codex it just says -1 damage. But then there's been no official FAQ and errata for Sisters, so it's like they fixed it in the app but not officially fixed it by releasing the FAQ for it. So there's all, so overall, to summarize this weird rant, it's good, but it's still a long way off from being really great. But I think, early doors, they gave you some money back or gave you a couple of months free. That was kind of cool. And I think it will just get more value for money when it gets rolled into Warhammer Plus. Yeah,
I think when it gets rolled into Warhammer Plus, it becomes a more worthwhile thing. I think, my weird thing with it is with each codex release, the app becomes less valuable because all of a sudden the only way that you can access the actual content is by owning the codexes. And then so it becomes one of those situations where it's like, okay, cool. So at what point are you going to turn around to your consumers that, like me, have purchased every codex, mostly because of this podcast, but, it's something I did anyway. But, someone like me who has actually bought the rules, are you going to turn around to someone like me in a couple of years' time and go, cool, you know what? We're just now going to let all subscribers access all rules. In which point it's like, well, okay, then, what do I get then for having bought everything?
Well, if there was a 2-tier pricing structure, like, £10 a month for all codexes access, maybe people would say that's worthwhile, or, a couple quid more than what you're currently paying. Maybe that's the way to go about it.
Yeah. There's definitely different models they can do for sure. But anyway, long story short is the year of 9th edition, the year that we've had for 9th edition has been marred by a few missteps, and I think the app is definitely the worst of those. I mean, when it launched, it was abysmal, and even now it's a bit sort of functionless. It works as a reference tool, but I can't imagine people genuinely using it to build army lists other than when Games Workshop were offering you an incentive to potentially win said army list. Like, okay, in those instances, fine, I get why you've done it, but I just think the app is it's just bad still. And I say this as someone who pays and uses it regularly. I can widely acknowledge that it's not great. And again, maybe I'm part of the problem in so much as I'm rewarding them for their failures in that regard because I'm still buying in and still using it. But it is interesting. The app has been one of the weird missteps because it felt like something that was going to be really exciting. I remember when it was announced, we were speculating that it could incorporate elements of BCP, so it could have all of like the competitive, annual competitive landscape, so you could kind of rank yourself against other players within the official 40k app, or that it might have functioned as a gaming tool, so as you could put all of your game data into it and use it to track your secondaries and your primaries and your missions. I thought it was going to be incredible for Crusade. I was like, oh man, because it's going to be great because I can put my Crusade force in, and then all this stuff's going to be. And this was, by the way, before I knew I didn't like Crusade that much. But,
I'm pretty sure they have promised that, though, haven't they? They have said it's going to have Crusade in it, I'm sure. But all of this, it's going to take a while for them to come out with.
All of this was promised at launch, and it hasn't even got any of it. And that's the funny thing about it, is like, you go back and listen to the early promises about what this thing will contain. We're a year into 9th edition. It barely does army lists.
Yeah, I sort of suspect that the original devs who are internal to Games Workshop sort of overpromised and bit off a bit more than they can chew, and they've since then they've clearly hired more people. You've seen that on the kind of recruitment pages of Games Workshop, and it's going to take time, I think, for it to get better. But yeah, it's been a while since we've seen a big kind of content bump in terms of what the app actually does. It's sort of been stable at just here's the army lists builder, here's all the codexes, and they haven't really given us anything more since then. I think they've just been slowly doing like trickling little updates here and there, fixing bugs and stuff. But beyond that, we haven't got any new features.
Yeah, the app is a big misstep at the moment. But maybe with the advent of Warhammer Plus, we'll start to experience some upside on that, which is cool. So the app side of things, that was kind of interesting. And then clearly, and I feel like we've kind of labored this side of things to death somewhat within.
Is it Warhammer Legends?
But Warhammer Legends is another interesting thing, right? But they introduced Legends in 8th edition, right?
Yeah, I'm more specifically referring to the Forge World stuff here more than anything else, and the Dark Days, and the
Well, that's in the timeline, right? Because I mean, in terms of like, so obviously we did the Indominus thing, we got disappointed about the app thing, we got excited about the releases of a Xenos army, but then we were treated to the winter of Space Marines, where literally they went, "Hey everyone, have a bunch of Space Marine supplements and Death Guard, and then we'll see you in 2021." And it was like, okay, weird, but fine, I guess. You have done a new edition. Fair enough. But yeah, amongst all of that, the Forge World compendium, the the Imperial Armor compendium, and then also the ever expansive Legends that prior to this included a few things, now includes quite a lot of things, and definitely another misstep by Games Workshop in terms of leaving a bit of a bad taste in people's mouths, especially those who enjoy the taste of gas masks, I guess.
I thought you were just going to say Gorgon in general.
Why is that?
But, I think overall, as Krieg players, it was pretty disappointing. I mean, I've done many an episode on it already, so I'm not really going to say much more. It's rubbish. To this day, it's still a bit rubbish. Is
it the most disappointing thing about 9th edition for you is the fact that basically 9th edition has been a relative nail in the Krieg coffin?
Do you know what? And I'm sure at some point in this episode we will talk about the rumors for the Plastic Krieg, for the preview that's coming on Saturday. But overall, it really killed my love of Krieg. And it's like they're an army that I've collected for like 8-9 years now, super passionate about them. My one true army that I've properly built, painted, it's pretty much forever in terms of armies I've had. Even in the past, I would never really paint them all that much, but since getting back into the hobby, that's what I did. I sort of painted armies up, and that was the one that I did. I've since this year I've spent most of my time going off on Minotaurs, and a bit of last year as well. But I sort of am completely unfussed about Krieg at the moment. It's like I still enjoyed playing them. We had a great doubles game with the Rapid Fire Wargaming guys with it. But at the same time, it's just like, Krieg, I don't care anymore to an extent. And that is purely because of how they have been treated in the Forge World book and with the Legends, and the kind of roll out the rules and the lack of support for models that still exist, but they just haven't given them rules to it. So it just makes me feel a bit bitter and a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. And there is the end of my rant. I'm not talking about it anymore.
I mean, that is quite a damning indictment, though, mate. I mean, the fact that you were, whatever, such a passionate fan about a specific subsector of the specific faction within the game. And, a faction that you will openly admit has always had issues when it comes to its competitive viability. But the very fact that this edition has essentially rendered them, uninteresting to you I think it's one of the most interesting problems with 9th edition, and I guess we'll get into it now because now is as good a time as any, is that the way the game is at the moment is that it's designed in such a way that you have to play it in a very specific way. And with what they've done with the Krieg specifically and other factions, they just can't hang. And that's mad. Like, every prior edition of 40k that's been out there, you can get a fun game or an interesting game out of a dodgy army list. Like, there was a certain level of creativity that you could express where you could turn up and be like, yeah, my Krieg aren't going to beat top tier Elder in 8th edition. And you and I know that exchange very well.
Yes.
But yeah, but you could, with your level of like knowledge of the army, your generalship in terms of how you approach the game, you could edge out opportunities for yourself. It's fair to say within 9th edition, with what they've done to the Krieg, but also what they've done to the game, it's just a non-event. It's like, cool, I literally, like, the idea of you going to a not even a competitive event, like a fun gaming event for a weekend to play your Krieg, you literally, even in more casual games, you're just going to get completely done over every time because the game just doesn't support your army at all.
This is the thing. So I would say in 8th edition, whenever I went to tournaments, and obviously some were quite high level in terms of, like, you know, going to the grand tournament at Warhammer World, you know, it's not ITC, but it, you know, for, you know, what it was, you get the top players there as well, and going to other events as well. And I would always do about 50-50 in terms of my, you know, 3 and 2 is like my average. Sometimes it's 2 and 3. So 50% win rate. So that's pretty bang on average. I'm more than happy with that, especially, as you say, Krieg throughout 8th edition was still relatively unloved and rocking an index for the entire edition, which in itself was really frustrating. But now I almost look back at it as like the glory days of Krieg, where all their models had really cool, interesting rules. And you could make them work with, you know, a bit of work and elbow grease, but they could still work. And you know, I went to No Retreat in October last year, September, October. I'm trying to remember my win rate then. I think it was 2 and 3. So I still won some games. So I don't think it's necessarily the edition itself that is wrong, although I think it's, you know, the mission structures do hamper guards to an extent in terms of, you know, and I had a particular, like, you know, all tank type build as well, which probably necessarily didn't do me any favors. But I think more so now. So if I was to play a game now, I'd probably get stomped a lot more, and I think that's due to like the power creep of the codexes that have come out. Like, they've, you know, Space Marines was good, and in fact, everyone would say toned down from its second 8th edition codex because there was 2 of them. So that one felt much more balanced, and, you know, no one really complained too much when the Necron codex came out. That felt pretty good, but sort of since the Space Marines have, you know, the range of supplements and books that came out of Space Marine, since then, all the Xenos, Admech sisters, everyone's just been going like, oh my god, like the power level of these codexes seem to be so much higher. And I think that feels like that's what's breaking the game as it stands. Like, if you've got an old army like Elder Guard, for example, you're going to really struggle against those newer codexes.
Yeah, I mean, the newer codexes definitely is one of the interesting things. And I think, you know, yeah, not just in terms of like power creep, but what they unlock for you in the game in terms of what they give you access to. It's quite striking, to be fair. I think one of the things that was really interesting about early 8th edition was that they kind of reset us all to like a baseline. And we had the problem where codexes were creeping up because it was sort of similar in that regard. So in that respect, I can't overly punish 9th edition for where it's at. But I think one of the things that's quite striking now, though, is the fact that even when you had an underpowered index in 8th edition, the core mechanics of the game were such that you could still work around it, even with, you know, the core stratagems and other bits and pieces, because you could do certain gimmicks in game or come up with other kind of like strategies that gave you some viability. there wasn't such an abundance of stratagems that it was so ridiculously one-sided. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Early doors, Chaos Space Marine, Guard, Space Marines, and then some of the other books that preceded from that, Custodes, other things, Death Guard. These guys all got like very, very good stratagems and other things, but not to the extent of what stratagems have become today or what they had become towards the end of 8th edition. Early books were relatively tame, but those extra stratagems did boost armies. Whereas now it's like, it's just such a bloat in so much as like, not only are you getting the really cool stratagems, you're getting a whole heap of extra rules that massively benefit the way the game is played. That being stand of the objective, move through the terrain. Mobility is king now, and it's made the game very interesting. And I think that's one of the things that's sort of weird about it at the minute is that, and maybe it's been a problem as old as the game, that there's always going to be this codex creep element. But I don't know, at the moment, mechanically, there seems something quite weird about 9th edition that creates a bit of a strange vibe. But I don't know on that front. But yeah, I think, it's been interesting. So one of the things that has probably defined this edition so far has been the relative lack of games played and the general kind of establishment of a sort of an everyday gaming scenario with 9th edition. What I'm interested, I suppose, to hear from you, Phil, is how you feel like that's impacted our perception of 9th edition up to this point, and what you suspect the future will be for 9th going forwards. Do you feel like we're going to really double down on this grand tournament methodology, or do you feel like there is a sort of a shift coming at the moment as we sort of see people potentially become slightly disenfranchised by this competitive or nothing kind of attitude that the internet kind of filters?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a sea change, at least within our group of gaming buddies and sort of extended friends, so to speak, where I think a lot of people are a bit bored of the GT mission pack. And in part, well, I think partly just because it's the GT mission pack, and that's the original version, and in part also due to the fact that the new version is the same missions but just with tweaked secondaries. And I think normally the GT pack comes around, or chapter approved as they were formerly known, and every year you get a bunch of brand new missions that you're all kind of quite keen to play. You might not necessarily think they're great or not, but you're always willing to give it a go and check them out. Whereas this time it feels like, okay, cool, I've already done that. Like, I already know these missions. Or I say that as I've probably played each one once or twice, because that's how much I've actually got to play last year. It's not a huge amount. And even now I'm already like a bit over it. And I think that's in part due to the mission structures as a whole, but also how the sort of secondaries work. And I sort of do long to play some open war and Crusade with you, Dan, and other people as well. But overall, I'm sort of harking more to those sorts of style, because for me, Eternal War was something I've been playing since the year dot. So I do miss that mission sort of format. And I don't think it's being nostalgic for the sake of it in terms of rose-tinted glasses. There was always issues with various versions of chapter-approved missions and stuff. But I think the simplicity of the scoring made it so much better than what it is now, just in terms of like mental load, in terms of when you're playing, how much sort of pseudo bookkeeping is needed and things like that. So, and also we're missing Maelstrom of War. That was something that we enjoyed playing in 8th edition, and then effectively got canned at 9th edition, and they produced White Dwarf rules for a beta version. So maybe that's something we'll see going forwards as well. But I think in terms of getting back out there playing games, I have very little interest in playing kind of the GT mission pack anymore. I'd much rather give Open War a go, much rather give Crusade a go, much rather, I've been coming up with ideas for my own missions. I'd rather just do anything other than the GT mission pack. But that's just me. I don't know if that's a general feeling about a lot of people, but I have seen people kind of criticize the loudest voices being the tournament players, but that is not the largest majority of players.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of prevailing kind of internet sentiment towards things has been one of the more interesting things for me. And I think one of the things is that essentially it does feel more and more now that it's like competitive or bust. And I've seen people kind of like tailor their content around it. I feel like there's this kind of attitude now that people are out there chasing this stuff. So a lot of the kind of content producers that I've typically engaged with have definitely tried to change their output to pursue where they believe that the bigger kind of numbers reside, which is within that kind of competitive scene, because obviously there's a lot of people out there looking to be a better player, and a lot of people that are super interested in the high end competitive play. And I think actually as well, and this is something that I think is really important to remember about 9th edition. 9th edition has to be the most played edition of 40k on Tabletop Simulator ever. Like, there can't be another version of 40k that has been played more on Tabletop Simulator than 9th, right?
True,
like,
yeah.
And I feel like the influence of that Tabletop Simulator has also been massive in terms of how people express or experience the game. Because one of the things that I found that was really interesting is I was talking to someone who was talking about the subsect of the competitive community that were using Tabletop Simulator and using Maths Hammer to resolve all occurrences in game, because they'd essentially asserted, for the purpose of their competitive play, that rolling digital dice felt wrong. So they had opted instead to just essentially use Math Hammer equations to determine how many in that unit will die. So they literally were like going, cool, Math Hammer says this squad kills 2 models. That is how that exchange works. Like, people had literally dialed it down to that extent.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, in theory, you could argue that's correct. If you had 10,000 Marine squads shooting at 10,000 orcs, the predicted number of dead orcs should be exactly the same as Math Hammer, because it just averages out on those sorts of large numbers. But when you dial it down to 1 unit versus 1 unit, that just doesn't work that way because of the probability of the math. So yeah, I mean, that's interesting that people have thought about it in that way. What a dull game though, surely, because then all you're doing is literally moving stuff around, because that's the only thing you have free choice at, and declaring what you're shooting at. Everything else is kind of completely automated.
It's ridiculous though, isn't it, within the competitive set though, because you don't even really have that much control over the movement, because essentially everything becomes so cold and calculated. It becomes, if I move here, I know that the odds of me making this charge are this, therefore I effectively need to assign myself to the ideology that this won't work. So effectively, it becomes so binary.
Even things like charge rolls were what I always do, a 7-inch charge, because that's what Math Hammer says.
Well, maybe. I mean, again, I'll have to be honest with you. I haven't taken part in any of these gaming events or things on TTS to know that intimately what they do. But yeah, I just know that there are examples of that happening. I feel like they probably still felt it necessary to roll charges, just because I suppose that needed to be, because I suppose that's where the kind of Maths Hammer averages becomes a little bit too abusive potentially, because if you're working on an average of a 7-inch charge all the time, you can. That's a if you told me that you're going to get rid of 2d6 charges in favor of everything always charging 7 inches, has such a profound effect on the game. So I can't imagine they do that. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting though, is like so many of these kind of like early experiences with Ninth Edition are kind of dialed into this idea that you're going to have this very very binary thing. And again, I think it has influences on a lot of gameplay decisions, because I've tried using vertical terrain on Tabletop Simulator. I've tried having, like multi-layered ruins. The geometry, or rather the physics of that experience in terms of trying to get the miniatures to go on the floors is so tediously complicated because of how the game...
I imagine it's quite difficult, because when I've used Tabletop
awful.
Simulator, just trying to get a miniature to stand up on the board, like upright, is sometimes a challenge in and of itself.
Yes, yeah. And that's the thing. So I feel like even that has had an impact. And I think that's the thing that's really interesting, is that I think so much of Ninth Edition has been debated, and so much of it has been, constructed and confined within, the various, chat rooms and social media pages, that it's become quite bizarrely filtered. And I think one of the things that always used to make me laugh about this community of old was there was a difference between the people who talked about it and the people who were out there playing it. And I was always on the side of the people out there playing it. I was in gaming clubs and at stores multiple days a week, rolling dice and playing games. And when people on the internet were going, this is the best thing because I've math hammered it, I'd look at it and go, well, no, because of XYZ variable based on actual games that I'd played. But the thing is that now I feel like the prevailing sentiment for Ninth Edition has become so heavily influenced by that community. And I think people have lost that relative ability to play regular games, that they've lost that relativity. So it becomes more, it just becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think we are consuming this information that people are, putting out there on the internet, but I don't think we have as much tactile real world experiences of what this actually does in real games, that we've become quite jaded and quite again, I feel like more than ever, and again, maybe this is just indicative of how I consume 40k content, but it feels more and more now that there's more people out there chasing the the hallowed meta than in previous editions.
I mean,
don't know.
I can't say I've seen that myself. Maybe I just don't follow the same channels, but I wouldn't be surprised if people do, because the meta's the thing that you can always talk about. It's always changing, and lore videos, like I've got a new codex that I can talk about. That's it. Like with the going for that kind of meta chasing aspect of the more tournament style, there's always stuff to talk about. There's always tournament results that you can discuss. There's always, even after a codex has come out, you can talk about that and the meta that's going to bring. But also, few weeks later, it's like, well, the meta's changed because people are countering that codex. So let's talk about that. Or there's an FAQ, let's talk about that. There's you can always talk about rules, combos, best units, best armies, top 10 lists, whatever. There's always kind of that kind of content that you can create from that. Very few people want to put in the effort to do, like, let's do a narrative campaign that we're going to custom write ourselves and we're going to voice act and stuff like that. Like, that is almost, like, to me, the gold standard of 40k, but it's the one that probably requires the most effort on the participants or the creators, which is why you see it the least, probably.
Yeah, it's true. It's a very special thing when it happens, but it's so rare that it happens, unfortunately. No, it's an interesting perspective, though, Phil. I think that's the thing. I can't wait to get back to a place where we can go out more regularly and play more regular games with different people and see what becomes established. Because I think that's one of the weird things about this, is that, again, in the days of old, in 8th edition, there was the game of 40k that Games Workshop created and put out, and that was Eternal War or Maelstrom. Eternal War was seen as their competitive system. Maelstrom was seen as their more kind of like, fluffy system. And then there was Open War, which was just a complete free-for-all. And
narrative as well, which
and narrative,
you never once even touched. But I always like the look of. It was always tantalizingly out there.
There you go. But, there was all this, the established way of playing a game of 8th edition for most people in a pickup scenario was you rolled a d6 on a 4+, you play Maelstrom, on a 3 or under, you play Eternal, and then you roll and see what Eternal mission you did, and you just did that, or you roll and see what Maelstrom mission you were going to do, and you do that. Like, that was what most, in my experience anyway, pickup games of 8th were like. You turn up, you roll some dice, and then you determine what you're going to be doing based on those dice. And then you just played it out the way it was, and you played the tables as they were. You didn't worry about specific terrain layouts. You didn't worry about any of that. You just enjoyed the fun of rolling dice in a sort of casual setting. And when it came to like the tournament scene, there was the Games Workshop tournament scene, but there was also a scene out there still for the Eternal missions. There were still people using Eternal War missions, even in ITC pointed tournaments. But then for the ultra super competitive hardcore players, there was the ITC system that was totally separate for that. But because it was totally separate, hardly anyone in the kind of mid-tier level was using it extensively. It was only really there for the ultra competitive. And I think that's the interesting thing.
In that respect, you're talking more to the UK, because I sort of hazard a guess that most people in, say, America would play ITC full stop.
Yes, forgive me.
That's my assumption, though.
Yeah, that would be my assumption as well. And maybe Australia and other markets where that might have been more of a kind of prevailing, way of playing. But, for the UK specifically, that felt more like how we kind of did it. We kind of played Eternal, we played we played Maelstrom. And then every now and again, when we had to at a tournament, we played ITC, obviously with a hardcore contingency, playing ITC week in, week out. And that was cool, that was groovy. I mean, again, in early 8th edition, the ETC was also a thing, right? I mean, no one talks about that anymore. That's dead in the water. But that used to be the gold standard of competitive play. And that was like a mixture of Maelstrom with Eternal with some extra stuff sprinkled on top. It was a maddening system, the old ETC rules, right?
I played that a few times. It was fun when you did the Eternal War missions and used those objectives also for Maelstrom of War. It got crazy when you used, say, 6 Eternal War objectives and up to 6 Maelstrom objectives on top of that in different places. That to me was puzzling as all hell.
Yes.
But when you kept them the same, it was like it actually kind of worked. It was pretty fun, I thought.
Yeah. But that was crazy, because back then, the ETC was like this lauded thing in 8th edition. Like, oh, you got to be playing the ETC. And then, obviously, that kind of dwindled. And I figure,
has it become the WTC now? Because I have no idea. I think they had a name change and a bit of a rebrand, or
there was a lot of politics involved in it, right? I have no idea. I mean, again, this is always the way it goes with the exclusive little clubs that want to be taken seriously and are filled with people who obviously invest a lot of effort and importance into the whole thing. It all kind of, like so many things, it all kind of crumbles after a while. But anyway, irrespective of me, completely misrepresenting and not understanding all the intricacies that led to whatever happened to the ETC, the point is that I felt like it used to be that there was 40k normal and then 40k try hard. And we all kind of just enjoyed 40k normal, and every now and again would break out 40k try hard, but it was different. Whereas now it feels like all we have is try hard, and that's the thing that gets weird to me. Is I really hope that when people start going back to normal, that normal games of 40k kind of come back. But
this is the interesting thing: is what is normal 40k? Because you either have the tournament rule pack or you have Crusade, which, as I try and get you and Richie into it, Richie's like, it's another layer of rules. It's not standard 40k.
No, agree.
So it's like you almost need a bunch of really standard. Effectively, you almost need the Crusade missions, because they are, for the most part, the old chapter approved Eternal War missions. You need them just taken on their own with none of the extra rules, released as a sort of standalone. You're just a normal person, right? You just want to play normal 40k without extra complicated rules. You're a 40k simpleton, maybe, and you just want to do simple 40k. This is for you. I guess the version of that currently is open war. And I think maybe some people were put off by it. I was certainly put off by it when it first came out. I remember we talked about it when they were first released, and I was like, yeah, I'm never buying that, because I played with the last deck of cards once or twice, because everyone played the Eternal War missions before. Whereas now I'm a bit like, oh, okay, we don't have anything other than the Grand Tournament pack. Yes, there was the terrain version that you could play, the terrain pack where you can bring your own terrain. I mean, I don't know anyone who bought that, but anyway, so I mean that is an option, but I just don't think many people will do it.
Yeah. And what you actually did there was remind me of another point of 9th edition nuances that have been very different from previous editions, which was obviously in previous editions, we got a chapter approved and it came out every year. Whereas another change in 9th is that 9th is the edition of chapter approves. There's like chapter approves coming out. There is. Technically the Crusade books are like chapter approved books, or at least they're in the same kind of like binding and same kind of presentation. They've obviously got like the terrain rules. I mean, again, like what an incredible misstep by the team at GW to have essentially gone, hey everyone, look at all these amazing new rules for terrain, and everyone just being like, nah mate, go away. But what do you think about that kind of style of release where they're just constantly going, here's another little pamphlet, here's another little supplement, essentially? Especially as well, which I will add, that every single one of these flipping things seems to come with a core rule book in it, and you seem to have to buy that every time. It's like brilliant.
Yeah, okay, so in terms of the Crusade ones, I think it's a very cool concept. I've always wanted to get, you're basically just getting like 20 plus missions with each one. That in itself is super cool. You can never run out of missions. If you're not a fan of the GT stuff, that seems to be the way to go. The downside, again, is potentially locked to the overall concept of playing Crusade and Crusade missions, and maybe you just want to play, you know, the let's say standard 40k, which is open war. It's I just want some missions with objectives that I score in my turn. There's no secondaries of any kind. There's no special Crusade narrative mission. I just want to play sort of a simpler game that isn't the GT stuff. If you want to do that, you don't really have anything. The Crusade stuff is cool. The Crusade books are cool. The downside with them is, yes, it comes with the core rule book, but not the Crusade rules that you need. So you've still got to take your big rule book if you want to do all the end of game sequence stuff to upgrade all your guys. So I feel like that was a bit of a misstep in terms of why not just put that in. Personally, I'd rather they release that core rule book with all the actual rules in, because I think even that core rule book is still missing stuff. Like it's missing how to make detachments, because the assumption is, you already know that, right? Yeah, of course you do. But sometimes you go, I want to build an army. I want to know what detachments I want to grab my small book to hand, not dig out my old big rule book. So I'd rather that was released as one single book, standalone, completely standalone. So when they do the FAQ updates, they're not FAQing every single supplement that's come out because they need to FAQ all the rules there. It just gets a bit bewildering. And then those supplements are even smaller. Like, brilliant. Yeah, I've got 2 of them, but I'd rather that than, effectively, if I've got those 3 or 4 Crusade books, half of all of those books are the exact same content and that I only need once. So it's a bit of a waste. So the concept of the ring binders, amazing. Sadly, we talked about it. Chapter approved this year isn't in a ring binder. Again, bit of another misstep. So that
Age of Sigmar got ring bound.
Well, they did. That's where all the ring bounds went, prioritized to the General's Handbook, as it is called. In terms of the general releases, I think it's really cool that they're giving us all of this stuff. So if you do want to do narrative play, you've got loads of cool new rules for it. Brilliant. It's not exclusively just tournament stuff, which I think is good, that they are supporting Crusade really well. I just sort of wish we'd get Maelstrom. Maybe that's what I'm holding out for.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the releases of like multiple little chapter approved ringbound books has been quite difficult to kind of keep up with, because they sort of come out and it's very difficult to kind of know whether or not you want them or not. And then, you know, again, the terrain one in particular was a spectacular misstep because they essentially went, hey, everyone, here's our new fancy terrain system. And look at all these amazing terrain rules you can get. You know, and then they did it like they went, oh, here you go, guys. Here's a binder thing with missions for terrain. But if you want the rules for the terrain, you have to buy a separate deck of cards with terrain specific rules on them. It was like,
were they not in the binder?
No,
okay.
No, they weren't, Phil. They were in a data card like pamphlet. It was like
I like the concept of what they were going for. I think the thing that
just so many missteps.
I think the thing that put people off is that they were trying to sell this as a tournament pack. Bring your own terrain to a tournament. You bring yours, they bring theirs. It's easier for the tournament organizer because that's one of the biggest hurdles for tournament organizers is building and painting terrain, whereas now you can just bring your own. I think that is the thing that put most people off, to be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to.
Yeah.
But if that was done as a casual setting and just gone, here's a bunch of cool new rules for your terrain, and if you want to play this ruin as an ammo dump and you want to get, you know, +1 to throwing grenades, cool, you can do that. You don't have to, but if you want to do a more fun narrative game and flavor up your table, sprinkle a little spice like that meme onto your table, like, you should be able to do it. But instead they kind of did it, but they locked it away in a sort of more competitive tournament pack that I don't think appeals at all to tournament people.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. And again, it still feels like a lot of the time they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? And the terrain stuff was very interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong, conceptually, I'm totally fine with the idea of having a rule system built around having allocated points of terrain for each player, but not in a game system where, I mean, again, it doesn't really matter now because the competitive community have won the argument and have essentially created a melee-based game, which, again, is fine if that's what they want. You know, it's not really how I enjoy 40k, but whatever, right? You know, again, you know, I've lost that argument, as I said multiple times. I may not like it, but it's fine. They've made it clear. But it's just that thing where it's like, it was just a bit of a weird decision. And then, the series of these little booklet releases, like the fact that, as you say, Phil, here's a bunch of Crusade rules for the game of Crusade, but we're not going to give you the Crusade rules in a book about Crusade rules. It's like, are you mad? Like, it's just, it beggars belief sometimes in terms of like the decisions they make and what they put in these things. And again, it just sort of feels a lot about 9th edition feels really mismanaged or really poorly conceived. Everything, certainly from a literature perspective or a release perspective, there's always something a little wrong with everything that isn't a codex. Like the codexes, and I'll say it now, on the whole, the codexes are the best part of 9th edition because of what they're doing with them. From a podcasting perspective, I hate them because there's too much now. It's ridiculous.
There's a lot of detail in them. As we've mentioned in the last few, sometimes they put rules in a very odd order.
Always.
And they don't get the basic stuff up front. And it's a bit illogical. Like Crusade always gets whacked right in the middle of like some essential stuff that if you're looking at from a sort of more match play perspective. But you are right, the codexes are phenomenally good and interesting. Lots of rules. Maybe you could argue too many rules to an extent.
I definitely would, yes.
But, you know, maybe that kind of crunchy mechanic appeals to a lot of people, and I'm sure the tournament players prefer that kind of added layer of complexity. But I think to maybe a lot of newer players, it puts them off to an extent.
I think this is the thing, though, mate. I think, you know, the codex system overall has been one of the most sort of shining examples of 9th edition and what 9th edition is all these codexes have been really interesting and within themselves up until recently, or even within themselves, relatively balanced. Again, I still attest the problems for 9th edition only really start when you actually start playing 9th edition missions with 9th edition terrain. Like, I think a lot of these armies aren't nearly as good in more kind of generic settings. But again, there's another conversation we're going to have on topics such as that down the road. So I don't want to kind of repeat myself too aggressively beyond what I already do. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of mechanical elements to the game that are really poorly defined, yet there are lots of elements of the codexes that go deeper into some of the kind of gameplay ideas that really make the game interesting. And I like that about these codexes, that they layer on interesting extra rules or things that give the armies a unique identity, which is great. I like the codexes. I like the artwork associated with them. I like the way that they're expressing the ideas of these armies now. But I do wonder about broader kind of mechanical issues with the game. Most typically as well, and this is the other thing that obviously one of the bigger elephants in the room that we haven't got around in terms of talking about a year with 9th edition. This was a year of 9th edition, but a year of adjustment from the 6x4 table, the tried and true 6 foot by 4 foot table, down to 44 by 60 inches, so 5 foot by just short of 4 foot. And that, to me, is probably one of the most interesting changes to the game overall for a number of reasons. But how are you feeling about that, Phil, a year in to playing on smaller boards? You thinking it's a good thing, a bad thing, an indifferent thing at this point?
Well, I think they have their pros and their cons. I think, personally, I'm a bit indifferent. It doesn't necessarily feel like it changes the game all that much. It does make a bit more of a crowded space, especially if you're having lots of terrain on the board. Like, moving large vehicles around is quite often problematic, I found, in the new edition. Or even just trying to deploy your entire army on the very small deployment zone sometimes, when it's I think it's like not Hammer and Anvil, the long ways one. No, that is Hammer and Anvil. Hammer and Anvil, but then the sides are missing, so you've got to deploy just in that middle section. It's on one particular mission. And when you do that, and there's also lots of like large terrain blocking, and it's, so for example, it's things like crates or rocks, for example, so you can't go in to them. It's not like a ruin. Then it's quite difficult to actually deploy certain armies, for example. So those aspects are problematic, I think. Overall, it's not too bad though, but I don't know, sometimes you'll just find certain armies really benefit from it. So, Dark Elder, lots of high movement can just zip over the whole board, sort of with relative ease. And it's a topic we've talked about off camera before, off recording, where it's like the boards have gone down, but the ranges of everything has stayed the same.
Or increased.
And so, I think, and especially the way quite often the terrain is meant to be set up, or the density of terrain, your 78-inch battle cannon is a bit pointless because you never get to use that range. That is, from one diagonal corner to the other, that you'll never have line of sight to use those kind of ranges anymore. And it's like, why not adjust all of those down a bit more to be a bit more realistic instead? So for the guard army, everyone just raves on about demolisher cannons because they got upped, I think, in the Space Marine Codex, because their Vindicator demolishers went to D6 attacks. In fact, I don't know if that was in this edition Space Marine Codex or if it was in the 2nd edition of 8th edition Codex. I think it was in this new one, because they have been slowly rolling out Imperium updates to certain things. So a demolisher cannon went from D3 shots to D6 and way outperforms anything else on a Lehman Russ. Yeah, it's only 24-inch range, but for beyond turn 1, it doesn't matter, because anything that you can see because of the line of sight restrictions is probably going to be within 24 inches for the most part. Maybe it would be 30. And a lot of things are crowded around that middle table aspect. So, it's easy to get in range of those things. So I think, that's one issue of the smaller boards. How are you finding them?
I don't like them at all, mate. I think the game. So again, and this is another topic that I really want us to discuss in depth in the future. So I don't want to give away too much of my in-depth thoughts on it. But yeah, we've definitely got a scale creep problem in 40k now. In so much as I feel like I sound really sort of over the top when I make these kind of statements, because it makes it sound like I know what, like I'm some kind of like seasoned game designer or whatever. But one of the core problems I feel like we've got with the smaller boards is it doesn't make sense, because I don't think anyone told the people writing the codexes or told people writing the rules or thought about the impact of these things, because essentially 40k as a model range is scaling up. The tanks are bigger than they've ever been before. The models are bigger than they've ever been before. You put a storm speeder next to a land speeder, the land speeder is as big as 2 storm speeders, right? So, or rather, sorry, a storm speeder is as big as 2 land speeders. So effectively now you're in a situation where a similar kind of vehicle, i.e. a fast skimmer with Space Marines in it, is now twice the size of what it used to be, yet you're playing on a board that is smaller by a percentile that I haven't ever taken the time to work out.
Let's guess.
But the point,
let's say 7%.
Yeah, 7%, fine. 7% small. It has to be more than 7%. I mean, technically, even if you just took the percentage decrease of taking 6 down to 5, I mean, that's like a 15% decrease, right?
Say 12. Meet in the middle.
All right. Meet in the middle, 12. But there's the point. It's like literally, like, essentially, what they've effectively done is, with the size of the miniatures combined with their movement characteristics, combined with their weapon ranges, it's like if you were playing on an old 6x4 board, you increasing the range of a bolt gun from 24 to 30 inches, because essentially in relative terms, that's what you've done. Because keeping a bolt gun at range 24, not that anyone uses bolt guns anymore, other than some things, other than Space Marine sisters, for example, I guess. But like, a range 24 weapon made sense within the constraints of a 6x4 board with a movement characteristic of 6 and all the other little pros and cons that came along with the decision-making process around that. Whereas now it's like, yeah, it's range 24, but your movement is 6. You almost always have some sort of aspect of your army that's going to be able to make you advance and fire that thing with no penalty anyway. Or, you're going to be able to put it on something with increased movement. And then, yeah, I mean, in real terms, I mean, I can do some really simple maths on it. But yeah, I mean, basically, yeah, it literally is like the way they've done the boards is effectively like they've gone, cool, we've increased the range of every gun because we've reduced the distance. And it just makes the game, like, I don't think...
I presume that is one of the reasons that has compounded the problems around terrain and line of sight, because... effectively, if everyone has not a near infinite range, but from your deployment zone, you can shoot someone else in the other person's deployment zone, i.e. a weapon that's over 24 inches, which is, as we talked about, bolt guns going to bolt rifles can all do that pretty much. Except maybe not assault bolters. What's the range of them? Are they 24?
24 for the assault bolter.
Okay. So, if you're on the deployment edge, you could shoot technically someone also on their deployment edge. But all the others have gone to a higher range. And therefore, the most important factor is line of sight. So you do need things that block it. Whereas before, if your range was 24, you could... So, yeah, if your range was 24, yeah, you could move into range and then maybe you'll be able to shoot at something. But... now it's sort of made worse by the fact that everything's closer together.
Yeah. Well, it used to be that everything had shorter ranges and everything was further away. So it accommodated a much more balanced system, because essentially if there's a 48-inch board and you've got a 12-inch deployment zone, if I want you not to shoot at me turn 1, I deploy 5 inches on from my table edge. But then I also accept the fact that I'm going to have issues doing something in return as well. But there's tactical reasons why that works. I mean, one of the big things that I used to use a lot was weapon ranges. Like I played a really very good game against an individual who goes by the name of Tank, known relatively well for contributing to Hellstorm Wargaming. I played a game against him at a GT, and I played against his Tau, and I looked at his Tau army and went, right, cool, fret range 36 inches, hammer and anvil deployment, so we were a long ways. So we were there. I had 48 inches of board, but available to me, and I was using predominantly jet bikes, so I had a fret range of 12 inches plus 36 for my scatter lasers, so I knew I had the full 48 to play with in order to get into his front line, and I knew that he only had 36 to play with the 30-inch range pulse and the 6-inch movement. So he was going first, so I was very sensibly deployed my whole army maybe like 5-10 inches away from my backboard edge, knowing that he couldn't shoot at me turn one, even if he had a line on me, because that was a tactical thing that my army was able to do. And I factored that into my thinking, and that was how the game played out. And then I, hosed down his army with loads of bullets by having the superior range. And that meant that my army was benefiting from a rule or benefiting from range. Whereas now it's like, that wouldn't even ever become a factor, because if I was playing even on the sort of hammer and anvil scenario, the distance between us would be the 24, but my back board edge would only be a further, not even 24 in this instance, it would be 18, right? So I will have lost, 6 inches of space for my army to deploy back from. And, the difference that makes is massive, because all of a sudden I can't hide nearly as well. And then I'm just going to get shot by all this stuff turn one.
Well,
so I think if you...
The pro of that is, I can play a game 40k on my kitchen dining table if I want to.
Oh, totally.
Whereas I couldn't before.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. I think, I haven't tried playing a 1,000-point game on the recommended board size yet. That's something I haven't done. That's something I'd be intrigued to see. Because when you play 1,000 points, you're supposed to play on a 22 by 3 foot board, right?
Yeah, I think it's quite small, and I've heard people say, especially for certain guard armies, that's quite difficult to deploy everything, or to the effective range is so much tighter, you can kind of easily get done over. However, I have played an awful lot of 1,000-point games. That was a thing I was doing predominantly at the end of 8th, beginning of 9th, and they were good fun, but I don't necessarily know I was doing on the right board sizes.
You're probably playing on a 4x4, which is a perfectly adequate size to play 1,000 points on normally. But going down to because that's even where it's even more dramatic, to the point that you're literally, I don't know. I think this is the thing. I get it. I get that it's good for certain people who have size restraints in terms of, or space restraints in terms of what they can use to play games with. But I do feel like, although the 6x4 may have felt like a relatively kind of like arbitrary size requirement, because again, this was one of the sort of weird statements that Games Workshop made early on in 9th, where I think it was like Stu Black or one of the guys in the development team were going, so once upon a time we kind of ended up on 6x4, and no one really knows how that happened. We just sort of agreed that that's the size a game needs to be played on. We just changed it, which in a weird way, not to go crazy about this stuff, but again, having started reading game design books by people like Rick Priestley, some of the people who were behind the original thing, there is a real legitimate reason why they originally stipulated 6x4, because the whole game was scaled with that in mind. So again, what a lovely piece of mad statement from people at Games Workshop, where they were like, we don't even understand why we said this was
it's interesting. So we can talk about it, I guess. We've both been reading the book called Tabletop War Games, Designers and Writers Handbook by Rick Priestley and John Lamshed. And in that, yes, they do talk about it, but they actually say 6x4 is just a universal tabletop size for all war games, not just 40k and fantasy. Maybe they were the leaders of it that meant others adopted it, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. So I think, if you're playing like some old, Romans versus barbarians or other medieval warfare, they're all playing 6x4. That's just the standard.
Yeah.
But I do kind of get where they're coming from in terms of the new table sizes. Interestingly, it feels like it's more, it's less to do with it makes the game better. It's more to do with that's the size of a board you can fit in a box. It's a very practical measure. It allows them to do a folded table mat effectively inside one of their boxes, because that's the size a box comes at, and that's very much a rigid thing that is kind of standardized, and that's the constraints that they work in. And sometimes, even sprues, we're watching some interviews where they're talking about sprue designs, like a certain size of a miniature is limited by the size of the sprue that can fit in a box. So sometimes a miniature can't be as big as it should be or could or would be, because it just doesn't fit in the box if they make it too big. So therefore it's got to be scaled down a bit smaller to fit in.
Yep. No, it's interesting. But again, I will say that, I think that's the thing. Basically, everything in 40k has gotten bigger, but the boards have gotten smaller. And that's just the thing that you're like, okay, weird. But fine. Like that, to me, my preference when playing 40k is to play it on a 6x4, because I have the space, I have the table, I have the old Realm of Battle boards. I'm going through the process of building more 6x4 boards right now. This is all stuff that I think makes the game better, is to play it on that kind of scale.
There's another interesting thing where we talk about the influence of the tournament scene, because most people, when they announce 6x4, most people are like, I think you'll find it's a minimum recommended size. You don't have to play it at that size. But then all the tournament players and the tournament organizers especially were like, well, no, we want this because it means we can fit more tables into our tournaments. Mikey from House of Wargaming, he does his own tournaments, and he was the advocate online for small board gang, basically, as cut up your mats, go down to a smaller size. It's the way it's meant to be played. And that's what's been advocated by the tournament scene at large, because it's more conducive for them to run tournaments in that format. And that potentially has a trickle down effect, because then everyone is like, oh, well, I want to practice a tournament event, so therefore at home I want to play these smaller games. It would be interesting to know from more casual players whether they care or not about the smaller sizes. Maybe they just play them out of convenience because they've got the boards now, like the cardboard boards that come with Indomitus and the other kits. So that's what they're going to play. But if you do have a very nicely designed 6x4 table like you have, you're going to just play that. Like,
oh yeah. But it's weird though, right? Because I sort of sound a little bit like I'm kind of speaking from a point of like relative rigidity, in the sense that, because I think if I felt like it was better for the game, I think I would have adopted it. And I bought the smaller mats already, and I've tried playing it, but I just don't think it's as good. I think you lose something by the smaller board size, especially with the way that again, when I play on a smaller board in a game of 40k, I almost never need to measure any distances, because it's always guaranteed that I'm in. Like, the only instances where I ever have to measure the ranges is for like pistols. And even then I'm surprised most of the time that I'm in range, because, all the pistols have become like range 15 for some reason or whatever.
Well, no, if only I had pistols that were range 15.
Well, exactly.
I mean, it's one of those things like, so it makes it easier to screen people out. But when you deep strike down, you're much closer to enemies. It's a lot harder to decide, I'm going to deep strike down this corner and shoot at range at someone, and I can't be charged the following turn. In a way that you could argue that that's good, because it means there's more interaction with units on the tabletop. But then you could say it's bad because it favors, more close combat-y armies potentially, because you can always deep strike down and be within range, charging distance of something, if that's what you want. But if that's not your army build, then maybe it's a hindrance to you.
So all I'll say last on this is that when Age of Sigmar came out originally, I tried playing it and I was really unengaged with it because basically Age of Sigmar had become a game where I line up, you line up, we smush into each other. Regardless of what we do, that this will end up being some sort of big smush in the middle, and then we roll dice to just determine who wins based on random fate, based on a sequence of events and who's in the middle. And I feel like 40k has kind of gone that way as well now, where it's literally, we've kind of forced it into a scenario where you kind of just smush up in the middle and then stuff just kind of dies sort of erodiously, and then you just kind of go, cool, I win because I was better at smushing into you than you were at smushing into me. And it's like, I'm not into it. Because again, so closing statements on 9th edition, mate, because I'm conscious of the fact that we have kind of lingered here for a little bit. This was, us trying to reflect on the year of 9th edition and all the myriad things that went into it. Could you please, for me, Phil, or I would be happy to go first, because again, I'm sort of hitting you with a bit of a sort of random question that you weren't prepared for. Could you give me your highlight, your low light, and your optimistic predictions for the future?
Okay. Highlight, Warzone Charadon. I don't own any of the armies in there, but I bought it because I was like, I want to read some lore. I want to see what these Warzone books are about. I love the concept of them. I love the concept of Vigilus. I've always gone, give us loads of Warzone books, different ways of playing. So I picked that up. I read it. Story's very cool. Art's very cool. The campaign system's pretty good. Seems pretty solid. The narrative-esque armies and supplements, Armies of Renown and Codex supplements, all very cool. Obviously, controversial issue of should it be locked away in a supplement when it's released on the same day almost as the Codex, i.e. Death Guard. No, I'm okay with that. It's a different way of playing for that army. If you want it, great. If you don't, you don't have to buy it, is how I saw it. Overall, I think that was very cool. I'm looking forward to the second one. Warzone, Octarian, Octavius, whatever might be the next one. I'll probably get that one as well. Whether it's got Guard or Marines in it or not, I'll probably still do it. As a bonus, I'm going to save a White Dwarf supplementary stuff that we went through quite recently. That was always good fun as well. Nice that they've
that was surprising.
Nice they've sprinkled some stuff in there. There's going to be some stuff in the next episode, next issue that we can go through. I think they've done some stuff around, I want to say flagships, but it's not. It's the Torchbearer fleets they're doing rules for, as well as some kind of characters for them or something like that. So that'd be interesting to see what that all comes about when it gets delivered through middle. Was it low lights? Low lights will be the Forge World treatment that happened with Krieg and the Codex Compendium. I've gone on about it enough. I won't talk about it anymore, but that was disheartening and disappointing. You can do better, Games Workshop, basically, and you still owe the Krieg community a Gorgon. And optimistically for 9th, I guess so. Yeah, I think it should get better. I think we're in this weird stage where 8th edition codexes don't perform very well. For the most part, 9th edition codexes perform really well with each other. They seem probably quite well balanced because they're a lot more powerful. So once we get around to everyone having a 9th edition codex, a month before 10th edition probably comes out, that'll be a great game. I think it would be really good when everyone's getting to play on a bit more of an even footing. I think the thing I'm most excited for is the range refreshes that we might be getting. So the Orcs getting a ton of new models, whatever else might get a ton of new models in the future. The models are always like the driving force for the hobby, at least for me anyway. Like they're always cool to see stunning sculpts, and the quality of the sculpts are just getting better and better as well. The detail on the miniatures, it's all fantastic. It's to me, that's always the most exciting stuff, whether it's collecting potential, conversion potential. It's like that is completely separate from the rules, so it can't necessarily be ruined if we think the rules aren't very good. Obviously people fall into the trap of buying something because the rules are really good just before they get nerfed. stuff like that. But overall, yeah, pretty positive, but in a non-tournament setting for me.
No, I hear you, mate. No, it's so good. It's good that you're mostly on the positive side of things, which is cool. So for me, I think like the highlights from my side of things, I definitely feel like the Necron and upcoming Orc ranges are a highlight for me, in so much as I think, from a model range perspective, I think with everything they did from like the Sisters to now, in terms of what they did with the range refresh for the Sisters, followed by obviously the Crons and, soon to be the Orcs, has been really exciting. I think that's really great to see. And I think that's something that, we as a community can get excited about. I did also really like the codexes overall early doors. I was a big champion of what they were doing with the codexes and how I actually saw that they were attempting to balance the game in a really interesting way. I always felt like the Marine Codex was getting a bit of a bad rep, because actually everything I was reading really told me that they had taken steps to ensure that they weren't going to be too overpowered. Okay, the Eradicators were a bit balmy from the outset, but as the meta has moved much more kind of mid-range horde hammer, those aggressive melter guns are relatively tame now. So I'd say like the codexes, the marine releases, the range releases in general, I think we're just getting amazing miniatures. I'm so excited to see what they're going to end up giving Be'lakor and his armies when that release comes through, and what happens with the Orcs. And I'm so excited about this upcoming weekend's announcements. All the plastic Krieg talk that's going around the internet right now, Phil, but I'm sure we'll address that in the outro.
No, for sure. Yeah. Hold on, I've also got to take a shot because you mentioned plastic Krieg. That's the rule now.
Is that the rule?
Yeah.
There you go. So from a positive side, I think it's just the model ranges and what they're doing to support the game system overall. I've also liked with 9th edition how much more kind of expansive things are getting. The fact that they are introducing the Warhammer Plus elements with like with the animations, and they're also doing the toy lines. I'm really excited by all the stuff they've been doing, like McFarlane and stuff, to release like action figures of Space Marines. Yeah. But it's exciting. More people getting into the hobby. I think that's great. I think that's really cool. So look, on the from a general kind of businessy perspective, I think 9th edition has come with some really great miniatures and some really great additions to bulk out the overall experience. The lowlights, I'd say, are pretty well documented. The app is terrible, and that's as much as I need to say on that. I don't like the fact they reduced the board sizes. I think, ultimately I understand the reasons why they did it, but I'm not keen on it. I don't like the prevailing tournament ideology and why we have to play the game in such a rigid, very kind of one-dimensional way. I think that's one of the least interesting things, because I've been in the Warhammer 40,000 hobby since I was 13 years old because of the hobby, because of the expression and the excitement and the general kind of, fun of the thing. It wouldn't have retained my interest for as long as it has if it wasn't, a hobby of, versatile and interesting kind of ways of kind of expressing myself. Now, admittedly, I've always been more of a gamer than a painter, collector, hobbyist. But, what I'm seeing at the moment isn't really kind of, hitting all the right notes in terms of gameplay. So that's a bit weird and strange, but that's not directly Games Workshop's fault. That's more of a broader community thing. And then, I guess lastly on the low light side of things, it's still some of the weird little core mechanics that are in the game. Like, I don't understand why combat is the way it is. I don't understand why the stratagem system needs to be as bulky as it is. I just think there's lots and lots of bloat that they need to figure out. And then in terms of like optimistic predictions for the future, I think we're going to see loads of really amazing miniatures and loads of really amazing range refreshes that are going to be really exciting. But genuinely, what I want to see for the future is more kind of mission systems and more things that add more versatility to gameplay. And I want to see, I guess I would just want to see things that kind of expand the lore in more kind of interesting ways as well. I know they've kind of been dabbling with teasing things, but I think I think Psychic Awakening was a massive letdown, and I think we are due something significant. The return of Be'lakor feels significant, but I think the problem is with Be'lakor is that because he's both Age of Sigmar and 40k, it kind of gets diluted across two systems, because Be'lakor is probably a bigger deal in AOS than he is in 40k at the moment.
You give me a Primarch or Demon Primarch or that kind of thing.
I think we're owed one, right? Because it's been a while.
Well, we haven't had a new one in this edition of the game, so you could argue that we do need one. Would you pick Loyalist or Chaos though?
I'd go Chaos again, certainly.
Same. I've been saying Fulgrim for like 4 years now, so it's got to pay off.
Yeah, Fulgrim all the way. Like he absolutely. You need to do a Fulgrim or Agron. I'll take an Agron. Like that would be Angry Ron. Come on now, that'll be the way forwards. Because the idea of like a Cornate Demon Prince Agron. That'll be a thing. But yeah, no, it has to be Chaos, because I think you always have to stack the odds. But yeah, if you're going to do anything, I think Fulgrim's the most interesting, because obviously of the relationship between him and Guilliman. And Guilliman. Here's a question though: if you do Fulgrim, right? Last little thing to say on a completely different thing. Would you purposely make the miniature ugly, but yet sort of weirdly, elegantly beautiful? Because one of the things that's really weird about Fulgrim is that he's essentially achieved this state of like weird serpenty perfection, but at the same point is probably quite grotesque, but then has all this kind of like, because the way they describe Fulgrim is there's sort of beauty in his function and his form in terms of the way that he moves and the way that he is able to kind of, conduct combat, as it were. There's a sort of fluidity and, elegance to his motion, but he's a hideous creature in isolation. So tackling that in a miniature form, I don't know. What would you just would you give in and try and just make him beautiful, or would you go for something quite disgusting but really elegantly posed, I guess?
Well, I would obviously go whatever the law says. I always assumed, because he's with the Emperor's Children, that he would be quite prideful and like a bit of a pretty boy. Obviously part of him, the sort of snaky demon half, would be quite ugly, a bit like Marathi to an extent. I assume his top half would be a bit more humanoid, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's a bit more like full-on demon, in which case he needs to be.
Well, the thing is, with the way that the Emperor's Children kind of express their pursuit of perfection is they become so much more warped in terms of their sensibilities. So like, there's one guy who thinks he looks beautiful, but he's essentially like peeled his face off, and he's literally like, he's got like dribbling more where his mouth used to be, and it's all, what I mean? Like these guys, like, they drape skin over their helmets because they're like, yeah, that's beautiful. They're psychotic, right? Like they have this weird kind of perverse, adaptation of what beautiful is, and that's one of the things that's kind of really fantastic about them, is that they're so deluded and crazy that they're in the pursuit of perfection, but their version of perfection is utter. Like, it's just grotesque, and that's one of the things that's quite incredible about
it. Maybe they're playing to that aspect of it.
That'd be amazing if they did. Like, I would love it, but the problem is it marketable? Because if you do a Fulgrim model that's kind of true to the ideas that they express in the narratives, will it look good enough that people want to buy it? It's like, do you want ugly old weird serpenty Fulgrim? I mean, again, the pose is going to do a lot. I would
probably say the new Cruel Boys, for example, are ugly models but beautiful models, if you know what I mean. They're deliberately kind of ugly looking orcs, but the sculpts and the models themselves are really fantastic.
That big dude they've got with the cage or whatever it is, and the riding around on a lizard.
Oh yeah, that's very cool. To me, that one more than all of them really look very like from the movie The Labyrinth, and it's got a real kind of sort of puppet-esque vibe to it that I just think is super cool. Yeah,
I am a destruction player in the world of Age of Sigmar. Not that I really play Age of Sigmar.
Yes.
I might add some cruel boys to my Gloomspite gits, but then the Gloomspite is just fun as they are. I'm happy with just my weird comedy trolls.
Yeah.
They're a much more enjoyable time. But there you go. That was our reflections on a year of 9th edition. It's fair to say, I'm not trying to, I feel like we potentially have a bit of negativity in there, or a lot of negativity in there towards certain aspects of it. But I think, I think myself and Phil have come to a kind of conclusion that we're kind of at a point now where we're becoming a little bit sort of disenfranchised with some of the kind of like tournament-y, organized-y play side of things. And we're looking more towards how we can start to kind of eke out what we consider a more kind of fun and rewarding style of gameplay. So that's not to sort of belittle or suggest that people who enjoy that style of gameplay are wrong for doing so. It's just more that it's just not for us at this moment in time. It doesn't quite work with what we're looking for in the game right now. So, obviously, if you find our views on the kind of competitive scene relatively abrasive, we apologize. But, ultimately, obviously, if you enjoy it competitively, if you enjoy the GT mission pack, fantastic. I'm not going to suggest that you're wrong for feeling that way. And certainly a lot of people are obviously really enjoying it. I just think at the moment, what's been really interesting for me is it's interesting how during all the lockdowns and other things that have been going on, it's filtered everything and made everything feel very one-dimensional to me. So yeah, my sentiment is very much towards trying to encourage us as a player base, as a community, to embrace other methods of play, because I feel like there's more fun to be had with 40k than just trying hard to play it at the apex level. But I'll let Phil have his final thoughts, and then we'll move on, right, Phil?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm basically just changing my dosage of medication. I'm taking less tablets of tournament play, which I've never really been into, if I'm honest. I've done it mostly at the behest of you and Richie, who want to go to like the GT events at Warhammer World and stuff like that. Obviously, I've gone to events like No Retreat, which is always just done as like a casual gaming event. And for me, the fun thing about playing 40k is events is meeting other people, playing other armies, playing armies that I don't normally get to play against. Social aspect of it is quite high as well. It doesn't need to be a tournament. For me, I'd much rather there just be events. You go, it's like a campaign weekend or something where you're going, you're playing 5 games. Honestly, don't care if I win or not. I don't want to be the top winning player. Like that, to me, it doesn't really matter. Like, I've never been that way inclined. So, I think it's always been there for me that I've always just geared myself more towards the casual side of it. And I think now I'm cutting myself off, going cold turkey from tournaments as much as I can anyway. And then wean myself on a diet of open war and crusade. And I think partly that's just because I haven't got to play any of those games yet. It's like we did a couple of Maelstrom missions a while ago. Haven't played Crusade yet at all. So I'm really keen to play that. If you're a hardcore tournament player, then great. But get out. This podcast ain't for you. Shoo. Go on. Shoo. Go. Get off. We don't need you.
No.
Go on.
Wait. I mean, obviously, please, stick around.
Yes, of course. We love you really, honestly. Thank you.
Exactly. No, we do. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, again, that's this is the thing. There is layers to this, and it's great. And, I think all of us accept and acknowledge that, playing the game at any level is great because it's just great to play the game, but, and to support the community. And that's the great thing about the community. It can envelop all these different types of ideologies and approaches to the game. And I think that's what's really cool about it is, I think, yeah, no, I I still absolutely love 40k as a system and as a world and a narrative and all this other stuff. And there's so much great stuff that I can dip in and out of as I, kind of explore it. And, ninth edition hasn't really enhanced that hugely, but it hasn't diminished it either. I'm still very engaged with it. I still love it. I still spend way too much money on it. And I will continue to do for a while longer. But I think, there's some interesting potential here. And I'm hopeful that very soon Games Workshop will start to come to us with options that kind of simplify things a little more. I'm really excited for this rumored kill team thing, Phil, but let's talk about that in the outro, shall we? You've muted yourself, Phil. You were on such good form until the end there.
Yes, let's do it.
All right, transitional noise. Woo! Didn't really sound like a transitional noise, that, but there it was. Well, that was a lot of nonsense about nothing, Phil, wasn't it? There you go. Filler. We did all right.
I wouldn't call it that.
Actually, I thought it was actually all right, truth be told. I actually listened back to it during the day today because I was a little bit like, sometimes we do segments and I do wonder to myself afterwards. I'm like, what was the tonality of this? What was it like? Is it actually an interesting debate, or do we get a little bit muddled and a little bit lost in the shuffle? And there is a bit of that, but actually when you listen back to it, or at least when I listened back to it, I didn't discern any real kind of imbalance in our kind of sentiment, which is important to me. I like to have my opinions on this stuff, but I also want to be kind of measured with how I deliver them, because I'm not always interested in the kind of, I don't know. I try and always remind myself that I'm not a position of definitive authority when it comes to these things, and that ultimately people experience the game and enjoy the game in different ways. So I don't want to ever try and sort of come across like I'm trying to diminish someone's fun and experiences because I myself am not enjoying something in a particular kind of way. So I think we had some balance in there, but then maybe someone's listening to this going, no, you just slagged it off for 2 hours.
Ranted. Well, we're old men. We're allowed.
That's it. We've got to do this forever, Phil. We may as well, which is a callback to the 5-star review segment, which for us is only moments ago, but for you listening is now a good
several hours later.
Yeah, exactly. Assuming you even listened to that 5-star review, because that was a long one, but very nice. All good, all lovely. Come on then, Phil. Let's speculate. Krieg, is it going to happen?
Exactly. So shot glasses are ready. Fill it up with your favorite drink. Every time we mention plastic, we're going to have another sip. That's
Reset the clock.
It's going to work. So we're obviously talking about the previews that are going to be for you listeners out today.
Yes.
Or, well, actually, maybe not. It will be coming later today. If you are someone that somehow manages to listen to this prior to 6 p.m. on the Saturday of release of this podcast.
Saturday, the 10th of July, Phil.
Yes, that's an easier way of calling it out, but that would involve facts, and I don't do that. So we're talking about the Octavius Warzone.
I mean, you really are butchering this, but yes, that is correct. You are referring to the Octarius mission briefing.
Yes, which is a Warzone of sorts. There's lots of speculation.
It's also a Warhammer preview event. Probably more the important point.
Okay, so it's a preview event. We're just going to speculate about what it might be. There's been
noting that it's relatively redundant because most of the people listening to this will already know. So this is a bit of a bizarre kind of indulgence on our part, really.
Well, it's more a how good are we at guessing game.
Oh, exactly.
More than anything else.
Oh, I like this. The how good we're guessing. I'm going to say Elder Corsairs. There you go.
Oh, that would be pretty good. Well, I think
throw it out there. Why not? Elder Corsairs. I got nothing to base it on, but whatever.
Exactly. Corsairs, Exodites, they're all great new-ish factions.
Kill team Corsairs. Oof, done. There you go. It'll be Corsairs versus Krieg. Done.
Well, so the rumor that's been going around for ages is that it's Orcs versus Krieg. And it's like, I think the orc bit probably sounds correct. If we base it on, to start off with, it is Kill Team. You look at the font, that is the Kill Team font. So it's clearly Kill Team. If you look at how the last Kill Team box came out, that was to do with the Prior Nexus, and there wasn't a Warzone book for Prior Nexus, which was sort of a bit disappointing, but it was an ongoing thing, and they had a Crusade book. So you could speculate and say that there's potentially either going to be a Warzone book for this going forwards, or at the very least there's going to be a Crusade book for it going forwards. And in the preview for the next White Dwarf, that it's the next Flashpoint. So the last Flashpoints they've been doing were all around the Charadon sector, which obviously had its own Warzone book. So you can see it's building up potentially to be the next big kind of campaign sort of setting at the very least. That setting in the lore, because it already exists, is Tyranids versus Orcs. But you always need to have a human representative to, you know, as your viewpoint potentially. It's very rare.
Or a humanoid Xenos race like Elder.
Potentially for sure. So it's a bit weird almost that if your main setting is actually Tyranids versus Orcs, that the Kill Team box wouldn't be that. But, you know, let's just say it is Orcs because there's a lot of Orc releases. They're probably going to do a similar thing with the last one, the Prior Nexus, where you're going to have your heavy intercessors locked away from the Codex or from its own, separate box in the Kill Team box, just to make the Kill Team box sell even better. So it's either going to be a brand new, well, it's going to be a brand new Orc unit, either like redoing an existing one. It could be Orc Boys. It would make more sense to be Orc Commandos or something along those lines, a specialist kill teamy, I would say. And then, let's say it's Krieg, which to me doesn't make much sense, especially if it's Krieg infantry, because they're not kill team specialists. They're not scouts. They're not commandos. It would also then give you this weird separation between the Krieg range that already exists and this new plastic one-off squad, let's say, because it either is replacing the resin infantry squad that already exists and is currently still in production. I mean, that could be the case, but then it'd be very odd. It feels like then the rest of the range is sort of being made redundant, because chances are the scale of these models will be slightly off, because the Gaunt's Ghost models are way bigger than the Krieg resin miniatures. And it's more likely to be, if it's in plastic, the Gaunt's Ghost size of mini. So totally. So if they're doing one infantry squad of Krieg, it would be really odd to just do that. It would obviously then have to go 6 months, 8 months down the line. You're getting a whole range refresh and a supplement maybe, which, would be amazing. But I just don't see that happening.
It does seem weird, doesn't it, that they would go that route, because obviously Forge World has, although all being, a relatively reduced range now year on year, they do still support that range, and it's still relatively popular for them, if not very popular for them. So it seems odd to me that they would go about releasing plastic versions of those at this point. What I would love to see is like Steel Legion. I think Steel Legion is and should be the direction they take the Guard going forwards, or at least the next kind of major Guard kind of, baseline regiment, as it were. I think the Steel Legion are super interesting. I think they've got a lot of really great lore around them, but also I think when you're talking about orcs versus a form of guardsmen, the Steel Legion is the Legion of Apocalypse. It is the Armageddon, not Apocalypse, Armageddon, and they have faced off against many orc wars over the millennia that 40k has taken place across. So to me, like Steel Legion would be super cool. I mean, obviously if it is Krieg, that'll be amazing, but I just cannot buy into the idea that they are going to do a plastic range of Krieg at this point. It just seems so, from a business perspective, it just doesn't make any sense. It's like there's, especially if all you're going to do is put out a limited range of miniatures, like you say, Phil, like an infantry squad or whatever it's going to be, just seems a bit sort of bizarre to me. It seems
Yeah,
It just seems really strange.
I mean, there's a few things it could be. So, for example, if they did Grenadiers, that would be pretty cool in my book. So, Grenadiers have been out of production for like 5 years. They're like the elite veterans of the Krieg range. That would be great to bring them back. They are, as I said, elite, so they would fit in with the kill team vibe. Engineers would fit in with that kind of kill team vibe, but their range is already still being sold. So it sort of seems a bit odd to, again, replicate something that already exists in resin. And that kit doesn't seem to have much problems. It doesn't tend to go out of production as much as some of the infantry ones have. And the reason why they might shift it over to plastic is because Krieg is let's assume Krieg is very popular because they haven't been discontinued yet, unlike things like Elysians, the Renegades and Heretics, the Elder Corsairs, for example, that were all Forge World ranges. But they're notoriously difficult to produce and manufacture because they're so small. The way resin works and the silicone tears and wears down over time, so you're constantly having to remake the molds, but in addition to that you constantly have to remake the masters because they get damaged over time as well, which are used to make the casting of those molds. So quite often a range will go out of production for a long period of time, so like the Grenadiers, because the original masters have been damaged in some way, and normally they try and get the original designer to come back and fix them. But they're historically, I've been told, designing things like Primarchs for Horus Heresy or other Horus Heresy ranges. So there's one reason why they might want to shift it to plastic, just for ease of production, because it is popular. It potentially it could be a brand new unit. Imagine they're going to go, yeah, let's do something for Krieg. The existing range exists on Forge World, and we're happy with how that's going, but let's make something new. That would be cool. I think that'd be really awesome. Like, if it's, to me, the thing is, it would really need to be in the same scale as the existing stuff, which I'm not necessarily sure would be the case. The other option is that it's an Imperial Guard unit that looks like Krieg, because obviously the rumor is one of Valrak's, Chapter Master Valrak's sources, who's clearly someone that works within Games Workshop or is a playtester or something that has access to these things, has seen something that resembles a guard infantryman in a gas mask of some kind, and they've just gone, oh yeah, it's Krieg. But it might not be, because it might be still Legion, as you say. It might be the Cadian respirators, like the toxic hazardous environment kits that they used to do, that Forge World used to do, that they now no longer sell. So it could be something like that, or a completely new guard squad that just so happens to have some armor and some gas masks. Because quite often, as you see with a lot of the ranges, like let's think of a traitor guardsman from Blackstone Fortress, quite often they always like to do helmeted or versions of models because people hate painting flesh color and skin. So it could be a guard range that has their face covered up, just from a purely practical point of view. If you're going to, and they've done it even with the Cadian heads, there's a couple of options where they're wearing masks and stuff and things like that. So it could be one of those things. And it's, to me, my money's more likely on it's probably a guard thing rather than a Krieg specific thing. I mean, still Legion would make sense. Another popular iconic range. Maybe they're going to bring that back from the dead.
Based on that, you could look at things like Zotes. That'd be exciting. A whole squadron of Zotes. That could be a cool addition. Or, I don't know, maybe lean more into the kind of piratical orc elements, or go completely left field and throw in some, crazy Chaos Space Marine stuff. Maybe a unit of Emperor's Children. But I doubt that would probably end up being the case. It does feel like, to me anyways, that I feel like what we're doing here, it has the same air about it, the same feel about it as Marnius Calgar in a Redemptor Dreadnought. Everyone was so convinced that Calgar was going to be in a Dreadnought,
but
everyone
slightly
was
off.
Yeah, and then in the end it was like, no, he's just Primaris. It's like, oh, okay.
I guess the other thing to address is the other reason. So the last few days, the internet has been abuzz, and they've been 100% convinced that it's Krieg. So when they did the preview announcement on Warhammer Community, if you look at the thumbnail artwork, there's an image of a Krieg soldier, sort of somewhat silhouetted and faded out, but it's clearly a Krieg person. But it's also clearly from the Krieg versus Orc animation that's from Warhammer Plus. It's not a model. And again, the following day, they did a tease on, I think, the Facebook page where it was like a countdown. It was like 5 days to go. And the number 5 uses the same font that was used in the Krieg transfer kit for like the shoulder pads numbering and stuff like that, which is like an Imperial Gothic-y type font. So people have put those two things together and gone, well, there's definitely something Krieg happening here. My speculation is that it's just they're going to show more of the Krieg Warhammer Plus animation, because that's now a thing. They've announced that Warhammer Plus is a thing, so maybe we're going to start seeing Warhammer Plus drip fed into these other previews. And because the other way I was looking at it is, when it comes to these Warhammer previews, they sometimes give you a silhouette of a shape of a model. But do you remember there was like the Sisters battle tank? That was one of them, one of the silhouettes, and everyone was speculating it was, oh god, I'm trying to remember what it was called, the old Forge World tank that they used to produce for the Sisters of Battle. And then everyone was really disappointed because it wasn't that. It was this new battle tank that no one was expecting. So it's like, so this time they haven't given us a silhouette. They've given us an image of a Krieg person. So if it was take a shot plastic Krieg, that is a massive like spoiler. Like, Warhammer Community has never done anything like that before, to just make it so obvious what this is about, which is why I think they've probably done a bit of a red herring, a bit of a troll, and sort of gone, yeah, there's going to be a Krieg animation, so we're innocently put this thumbnail down in there. But the internet has latched onto that and gone down the tinfoil hat route of plastic Krieg, oh my god.
I mean, if it were plastic Krieg, fantastic, right? I mean, obviously that is a really, really exciting change that could, you know, could foretell something really interesting for not just Krieg specifically, but the whole Guard range. I mean, it would be bizarre to me in a way that Krieg could become the new mainline Guard regiment. I think that isn't likely, because I feel like part of the mystique and part of the wonder of the kind of Krieg is sort of some of the relative elitism that you can kind of associate to them, given their, you know, relative exclusivity through the actual, you know, monetary cost, the barrier to entry that represents, but also just what that actual range has always kind of represented historically, with all the amazing work Forge World had done from the outset of establishing them as their own unique regiment with their own unique units. I kind of feel like it kind of does a disservice to them to kind of make them mainstream almost, although maybe that's me just being a bit of a kind of hipster.
Well, you would undoubtedly be called a gatekeeper, because I've seen it happen recently on the Krieg Facebook group when people have expressed those kind of things of, oh, I don't really want it to be plastic. Now, I don't necessarily think that's right, but at the same time, it's like, I don't really care if they become plastic or not. It's like, I've got my Krieg army, I'm good. However, if you are interested in Krieg, you can't afford it. I mean, if that really is the case, plastic Krieg isn't going to be that much more affordable than it currently is, especially if you're in somewhere like Australasia, if that's still a place. However,
we still haven't checked.
No, we still haven't checked. So yeah, I mean, if you do want plastic Krieg because you really want Krieg and for whatever reason you can't afford it, or you just want to get into it and you hate resin because that is a bit of a barrier to entry for a lot of people because it requires its own sort of skill set, you got to wash the resin and stuff, I completely get all of that. And, you know, making Krieg go a bit more mainstream would be make it way more widely popular. Like, in a way, that's a good thing, right? However, I'm just not getting my hopes up. And as we talked about in the last segment about 9th edition, my heart has been crushed when it comes to Krieg. and Forge World and the rules and the legending of models and all sorts of stuff. So I'm just not at all willing to believe it until I see it. And if I get a nice pleasant surprise at the end of the day, I mean, fantastic, I will be loving it. However, if it's not, I would sort of be like laughing my socks off at all the people that have been so convinced that it is Krieg. So yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like I'm going to be a winner either way.
There you go. And that is the most important thing. And here's the thing. I'm not suggesting that I want the Krieg force to be gatekept by any stretch of the imagination. I think if they want to go down the lines of making it a plastic range, fantastic, incredible. But I think the problem is that it's weird to me because I feel like the Krieg kind of work well as what they are. And I feel like it's almost sort of like, I feel like there are other kind of like guard regiments that probably, that can fit into some of the more kind of uniformity of the range, I suppose. I think the thing about Krieg is because they were so deep dive explored into, and, I remember you obviously expressing certain ideologies around the idea of using abhumans in your army or using psychers in your army or using, things that aren't, traditional or proper Krieg, like, the idea of running sentinels or any of this stuff.
It's just not done, Dan.
It's just not right.
Just don't do it.
And that's where I think, and I always use you as kind of like the benchmark for kind of, the hardcore Krieg fan, which is to suggest that you've really kind of immersed yourself in the narrative and the hobby or major hobby indicative or representative of the narrative that's been kind of woven by the Imperial Armor books and the fluff and the stories that have been kind of expanded by the Forge World team. And yeah, you've kind of held yourself to that kind of to that creed, as it were, not creed in the sense that you've always, even though Bulgrins were amazing, you're not adding Bulgrins to your army, even though such and such a thing was a good option. You weren't adding it because you were playing to the template that was established. Yes. And I think that's where it's sort of interesting to me, because I feel like you're kind of robbing the Krieg of something by making them the kind of mainstream.
Yes, it sort of ultimately makes them a sort of a slightly more watered down version of them. If they were to become a sort of just, even in the current rules, they're technically just another guard regiment now that can take sentinels and abhumans and all this other stuff. So that is one of the disappointing reasons behind it. I think one of the reasons, if they were, again, take another drink because I'm going to say plastic Krieg, if they were that, you get the problem of they're very rigid, right? The great coats aren't easy to convert. You can't like just cut them at the torsos and do a top swap with a Acadian like armored torso piece, for example. Like they would be very monopose, and it feels like they wouldn't really be easily able to be converted to any other regiment particularly. I mean, maybe Valhallans at a push because they've sort of got great coats, maybe still Legion to an extent because they also have gas masks, but I mean that's sort of it. Whereas if you did, and we said it before, like if you did something like Morgian Iron Guard, it's like they could be a bunch of others like Praetorians, for example. Or I mean, I think as popular as Krieg is probably Catachan, but it's like just the range hasn't had much love. If that had a whole new release in plastic, people would lap that up, and it would become as popular as any of the other regiments, I think, out there.
I think Catachan is more the place that they need to kind of look when it comes to this kind of release. I think Catachan at this point has so much already established within its range that it's just a little bit, it's a hop, skip, and a jump away from being a fully established range.
Exactly. They've got a bunch of special characters already. It's like Krieg has one, and he's only ever had one, and he's now moved to Legends, and he never had a unique model either. Yeah. So I mean, there is potential. Like you could do a Death Rider special character, you could do an officer special character, a tank commander special. I mean, you could do all these things, but they don't exist as they currently stand. Catachan have a bunch of stuff, a bunch of limited edition character models or officer models over the last few years. To me, again, it falls into the same problem as they can't really be converted into anything else because Catachan are that kind of stereotypical Arnold Schwarzenegger predator type character. They're just all muscles. There isn't really another regiment that they could represent, I guess, unless it was like a homebrew one. But if you're talking about the overall designs and archetypes of the pre-existing famous regiments, Catachan and Krieg are almost like the two outliers of they can't really be anything else.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting for sure. What do you think in terms of the kill team possibilities, though? This is something that I'm intrigued about. Do you feel like kill team and where the possibility that this Krieg thing could work? Do you feel like there's a chance that kill team could be going underworlds, not necessarily in its rule set? I'm not suggesting that they're going to turn it into a hexagon-based, card game like Underworlds, but perchance they could incorporate some of the card elements, but fundamentally make it, a game like Kill Team. But the most important thing is you just get a range of miniatures or a kill team made up of a box of miniatures, and that's a fixed thing, and they do it in seasons, and they just keep rolling kill teams out every year.
We've said it before, and it's such a cool idea that, Underworlds, every warband is unique. It's nicely sculpted, but it always has AOS rules. You can plug it into either a pre-existing unit normally, or split them out into a couple of units, and you've just got unique poses. And as far as I'm aware, that's how it started. They were unique sculpts for almost like blister pack upgrades for AOS, but then they were like, oh, actually we can make something out of this and turn it into its own game, so let's do that and box them up as warbands. So it's like, why not do that for 40k? Why not release standalone kill team teams that are going to be faction specific, that you can play in kill team as is out the box, so you don't have to go down the route of buying 3 or 4 different 40k boxes. You could argue that Games Workshop wants you to buy 3 or 4 different boxes and convert up or build your kill team. But if you look at it from a purely, I want to get into kill team, what's the easiest way into it is to just do I'll buy a box and it's got my models in. And they did that to an extent. I don't think they were wildly popular, those kind of kill team boxes where it had the cards in, a team, and 2 or 3 bits of terrain. It's like, that's okay, but imagine if each of those boxes were unique sculpts, and every year you pretty much got a box for every single faction. It's like a mini update for everyone. It's like, cool, you got some Elder, here you go. You got some Orcs, you got some Tyranids, you got some, just go on and on. That would be amazing. And I'm sure when Kill Team first came out, we talked about this, and this is what they should be doing. And oh my God, it'd be great if they did do that. Not to say it's the lazy option, but the easy option is just carry on with status quo, and it won't be that. It will just be like it was with the Prior Nexus. It's, here's your 40k units, but we're just going to lock them away for 6 months. You want your heavy intercessors, you got to buy Kill Team. You want your I wouldn't say flesh terrors, but they're not the other Necron models that were unique to that
the
box.
flayed ones.
Flayed ones, that's it. Yeah. So you want them, you got to buy Kill Team, or you wait 6 months and then you can buy the standalone box. That's probably how they're going to keep doing Kill Team. But yeah, individual sculpts that could go off and explore things like Exodites, Corsairs, Renegade, Heretic, Astartes, all these sorts of things they could drip and drab from various places that have sort of been untouched. It's like when we're talking about Forge World stuff, they had a huge range of models that they now no longer produce. So Corsairs, Renegade Guards now in Blackstone Fortress. So there clearly is some part of Games Workshop where they're taking the Forge World IP and porting it across into the kind of plastic Games Workshop range.
From my perspective, in the 8th edition, we had a range of really amazing one-off sculpts, but that was Blackstone Fortress. And Blackstone Fortress was where they kind of expressed those ideas, where they went, here is a, here is a servitor or a crusader or, whatever it might have been, a rogue trader, all the different stuff that went into the actual Blackstone Fortress game. And I think they definitely sort of went down the Blackstone Fortress route and were like, there you go, that's how we're going to kind of do that. But I don't necessarily feel like Blackstone Fortress was massively successful by comparison to potentially Underworld. And I think Kill Team possibly wasn't as successful as they thought it could be. So I feel like there is a real opportunity there, because then all of a sudden it becomes really interesting, because you can start to express lots of, other ideas that aren't, necessarily abundant enough to forge part of mainline 40k, but you can start to go, here's a squat kill team, here's an Exodite kill team, here's the Corsairs, whatever it might be, and that's where it becomes quite interesting, because all of a sudden you can go, here is a servitor kill team led by a tech marine, here is a kill team based on Talon of Horus, so it's the various champions of chaos that made up one of the war bands in Talon of Horus. So you could have Fire Fist and his and his buddies doing all that kind of stuff. And I just think that's where
these ideas are gold, Dan.
Really?
They're really good. All the little war bands you've just suggested. And I was just going to say, like, the Kill Team did do this initially with the Rogue Trader expansion. They did the Rogue Traders versus the Gellerpox Infected. It's like, I was always expecting that they would expand those out into full factions. And it's like, they never have. And I don't know if that's just because they were only ever meant to be one-offs and can't really be expanded into full armies, or they were sort of trials and they wanted to get feedback from people, and maybe people just weren't that into them. But I thought the reception of those was really good and people wanted it. Maybe they didn't buy the game, but I think people saw Rogue Traders and were like, phenomenal, like, they're cool. Gellerpox Infected, really cool concept. Maybe a bit too similar to Demons overall to not be unique enough. But in its setting of what they were, I thought that was very cool. And they have released a couple more Rogue Traders here and there over time. There's 2 more that they've done. So it's like it feels like it's an idea that they want to do more on, but they just haven't quite expressed it or found the right way about going about it, as a sub faction though, or as a small, new faction. I think it's a great place to start.
Oh yeah, totally. I think that, if they did that, it would be amazing, because all of a sudden you can just introduce in and expand on ideas and offer new fluff. Like in Blackstone Fortress, they had one of the Men of Iron, right? That sort of things. There's something that you can look at there. There's so many like mad alien races that we never explore. The idea of making that a kill team, having mega arachnids, for example, which are quite a famous so
we talked about it in the previous segment where we talked about all the amazing art and the new rule book. One of them is a bunch of crazy aliens, and one of them is like a sort of spidery thing covered in guns, and it's like, oh my god, how cool would that be to see? And you're right, it probably can't be a full army, but you could do it in that kind of weird Blackstone Fortress way of, you've got a squad of them, you can probably ally them in some way, a bit like the old Warhammer Regiments of Renown, I think it was called, where it was like, here's these really cool individual squads, and you can hire these mercenaries out for any army, pretty much, I think is the way it worked in Warhammer Fantasy back in the day. And imagine if they sort of did something like that for 40k, that would just it would be really cool, but ultimately I think it would be one of those sort of damp squid ideas, because those kind of model ranges for Blackstone Fortress, with the exception of very few things, are never very competitive. And again, we're talking about, the tournament competitive scene, but then the rules for them are just not that good. And they're not even like good. They're just like a bit mediocre. So you go, oh, that's cool, but there's never a reason to run it. With probably the exception of Daedalus, who gets to give 1 unit, I think, or an aura, plus
We
one.
used to now has become the. It's something.
No.
He's still the same thing, isn't he? Now.
Well,
but
no.
just
So Daedalus still exists and has a data sheet within the Warhammer app. Last time I checked, which was when the Admech Codex came out.
Oh,
And
really?
he's also the techno-archaeologist. So it's the same model, but 2 different data sheets. Because the
Yeah.
Blackstone Fortress rules, the 40k rules, are still valid and still exist.
Well, yeah, that's exciting, I suppose. I wonder, is that the only thing that does that has 1 model that represents 2 data sheets? Is that a regular occurrence?
Doesn't happen. Well, you used to have the old Krieg Marshal represent a Krieg Marshal and,
Venner.
then the special character.
That is true. That is true.
But it is a rarity when that does happen. I guess you could argue, intercessors represent veteran intercessors as well as Death Company intercessors and all sorts.
Well, there you go. This is as versatile as the Death Company intercessor, or rather the intercessor, which, can also become Death Company. Anyway, there you go. Very exciting. A nice little foray there through, our various thoughts and feelings on what could be happening this Saturday. But I guess we'll talk about that in the next episode, I imagine, Phil. We'll more or less dedicate the greater majority of the episode to whatever they say, unless, of course, it isn't very good, in which case I guess we'll talk about something else, maybe.
Well, exactly. Kill Team preview, definitely something to talk about. Oh, we teased some other stuff last week that we didn't get to talk about this week. It might be one of those things that we did in the past where it ends up getting teased for 5 weeks' time.
What did we tease last week?
I had done a little survey about missions and had about like 300 odd people respond in a yes/no kind of manner.
Yes.
So we can talk about that maybe next week.
We are definitely going to do that next week.
I've got some more questions to ask for people. So keep an eye out on my Instagrams at Beyond the Tabletop for more over the next week. Then I'll make it happen.
There you go. Although you're forgetting, Phil, that we're doing a bumper recording session, so over the next week ain't going to mean nothing.
Well, that we can talk about more next episode.
Exactly. All right, fine. Bye-bye, Phil.
Bye-bye.